Exercise.
Radio Poquito, Radio Poquito, from mesh to mesh.
Edition 53
Well
with
said.
Andreas Exertus.
How you doing, Jim? How you doing, Raphael?
Distancing plague. Welcome.
Holding up.
Guten
Hollywood,
Abend,
trying to figure out how long to stay here.
Yeah, give me a remote view of Hollywood right now. Tell me about your day and the last places you've been outside and what people are acting like.
North Hollywood, I should clarify, so I'm in the valley.
That's nice.
Yeah, it's like, I guess. And I've been in the apartment of my friend Judith, who is in quarantine in Santa Monica with her boyfriend, for a week. I haven't left. I'm not particularly sick or anything. I just decided I wouldn't leave. So I was out a week ago, sunning and grounding and putting my hands on trees and shit like that, and I've come inside. And I think either way after this, I'll probably go outside just because I need to get some fresh air.
Just on principle. Raphael, what
Just
about
on
you, man?
principle.
What's it look like over there? It's been...
Well, all I can tell you is, there is always this meme going around, like when you realize that quarantine is your normal lifestyle. So individually, I'm not too disturbed by the situation, as I've been deliberately following mainstream media. It's just super interesting to me how much they focus on please stay at home, be a good quote-unquote citizen, and then of course they keep showing you the inner city and so on, and like, oh my god, it's a ghost town, and also interviewing random quote-unquote older people, and even them saying things like they never experienced anything like this before. So yeah, kind of interesting. But in general, aside from some people, in my view, of course, needlessly panicking, general, supply and so on is working out well as far as I can gather. And at least in my vicinity, I haven't heard anyone scream or go crazy yet or something. So it's pretty calm, I would say.
Oh, by the way, happy Lent. I was just thinking, it's still Lent, and we're headed out of the, Ash Wednesday was what, like February 26th before the leap year. And so it's an interesting time because people are in Lent usually supposed to give up something. So, but
All the
yeah,
things.
all the things at once. How about that? But it's funny
Well, Saturn
because
did just enter Aquarius, so it's like there's a shit ton of stuff in Capricorn, but now Saturn itself is not in Capricorn.
yeah, did you see that? I was like, Saturn. Oh no, he didn't. But like, yeah, he did right into the Aquarius. And we're now in this point when people are sharing their resources as little as possible. They're all as scared as possible to talk to each other. That's why we're talking sociopathic distancing, because there's a level where everyone doesn't trust anyone else anymore. And it's not just like targeted at the Chinese, because obviously the Chinese have even said, like, the China, besides the United States, China has done more than anybody else to try to figure out what the heck is going on. Like, they synthesized a DNA genome of whatever the heck was going on in historical Guinness Book of Record breaking time of like hours of days,
Which is possibly suspect, but go on.
I mean, totally, yeah. Everything is suspect. Everything should be suspect. The numbers, the data, all of the stuff you should be questioning. But I'm just saying it is interesting that the Chinese have also said, like, we're not sure that we got it from our lab. It could have been easily from the military games that happened in Wuhan right before here, which every military in the world, including the United States, was here. So there's tons of other things than to just blame the Chinese. So psychologically, people know it's like it's everywhere, it's everything. It could be anyone who's gotten a package ever, and so they're all worried about whatever. And it's funny because there's all these things that people already are living with, like parasites or molds and diseases and psychological issues. And so one of the things they're saying is that this virus, quote unquote, can really hurt more and kill people that have pre-existing conditions. And so you start thinking about, like, who doesn't have a pre-existing condition by that logic? Everyone thinks that they've been through something. So they're all kind of making a choice right now whether they're going to consciously choose to get sick or not. And subconsciously, like, that's what's going on inside them. They're like, oh, okay, I'm going to be the one, or I'm going to be fine. And you can see the difference in the way people are behaving based on that. The problem is people that are trying to be positive are being told they're not allowed to see each other. There's in California, $300, $400 fines for failing to follow social distancing rules. Okay, so like if you're talking to someone outside, the police can give you a ticket. There's been several in San Francisco. One guy was talking over the fence to his neighbor, and he was caught with some, I can't remember if it was a drone or it was a camera on a security system. Like, seriously, social distancing rules are about to become crazy. And, the question again, like you said, in terms of, is this speculative? Well, yeah, how much do you buy the official data from anybody ever? And considering what we know about the emulation on Event 201 that happened in, Bill Gates had financed an emulation of COVID-19 and showed it to be a very effective, is the word he used, transferable killer. This, all of this is just following kind of the same trends that like the elections do when they, find a video of the answer of who won a week before the actual airing of the numbers. So you can't be sure that any of the numbers are real. The only thing that scares me, though, is I know doctors in a lot of hospitals around the world who are dealing with this and are seeing doctors around them becoming sick with COVID-19. And so and they're not, they weren't protected properly at first. And that's pretty scary because the people that are suffering from this, and I don't think we're at a point anymore where it's this hypothetical whether people are going to get sick and get hurt. It might be not for the reasons that we thought, but there are enough people actually dying that I've met people that are actually in serious critical health issues right now. Some of them are under quarantine and in hospitals, but their chances are harsher than you would expect from someone in their 30s. But the thing is, if you start thinking about the HPV they're completely healthy. They've had every flu shot is their answer. I've had about 6 people tell me that are in like actually having more serious reactions to this, that they've had their HPV shot, they've had their, everything else. And so I'm starting to wonder if there's any correlation to mutations of other viruses. And we're going to talk also about that and what are viruses, because there's not even really a consensus that whether viruses are alive or whether they're just chemical reactions. It seems like there's more of a consensus between Jim and Raphael and I, though, that there's a certain amount of consciousness to the human body and to the different parts of the human body, including the gut fauna, your tapeworm, whatever's going on inside of you actually might be slightly more sentient, and our political body that is making up our body might be also reacting to stress. The way things happen with cancer and radiation, people think of as being this substance in the ground, but now it's in the air. And there's been a lot of evidence that every last major increase of electromagnetic frequencies has been correlated with an outbreak of people experiencing these like lentivirals. Oh, by the way, Lent virus. That's one of the reasons I was also thinking about that, was because we were talking about HIV at one point. We were talking about, and it's funny because HIV is a kind of lentivirus, so it's a slow virus that takes away from all the other things. But if we're looking into viruses and we're seeing more and more that the cure might be non-viral, like non-antiviral, even with this so-called sequencing of these maybe robotic-looking viruses, the president was talking about quinine, or hydroxychloroquine, which comes from quinine, which is what's in tonic water and tonic and gin and tonic. And so a gin and tonic, you go back historically, that was the medicine for malaria. That's why the rich still like it, because it kept
I just find
healthy.
quinine and QAnon very resonant.
Oh yeah, and I mean, Kofi.
But I also find the fact that he said to take these 2 chemicals the other day in the press conference, the only one I've heard, because I've been avoiding the news because I don't want to be afraid. Well, basically, I've heard doctors be like, "No, that shit will cause you to have a heart attack." So I'm not even really sure who to listen to anymore. It's such muddy waters.
When were you listening?
Listen to yourself.
Yeah, when were you
Well, I'm
listening
trying to do
to
that too. I'm trying to
doctors,
breathe. Huh?
When were you listening to doctors, though? I mean, like that was probably the time not to be always listening. I mean, I remember listening to doctors just to psych myself out. I'd be like, "What do you think of fluoride?" They're like, "Well, it's really important that you have it all your life so that it really gets itself into your teeth." I mean, like doctors, not just dentists. Like the doctors I had to tell doctors to start recommending quinoa to people. Like they're so backwards because they're taught by pharmaceutical representatives who go in and give them a clock, a watch, and a trip to a hotel with a pool in order that they start selling their new drug. New. The old one, not useful. Like that one from 5 years ago that's been tested, get rid of it.
Just to be clear on this, from a historical perspective, briefly, as far as I understand, actually let's say America or North America had plenty of so-called naturopaths. And when I started my nutritional research quite a few years ago, I was like, well, whom to trust? Just like you say, Jim, it's kind of difficult, especially with doctors. Then there's this guy called Joel Wallach, who is talking about, I believe, the 92 essential elements and the idea of that doctors don't lie. So then you have this interesting situation that many accredited doctors actually die earlier than usual life expectancy. So you might ask yourself whether you want to trust those guys for your longevity ideas if that profession is dying early. But anyhow, so
if their car drives into a tree, that doesn't count. If someone drives their car into a tree because the government or the pharmaceutical company takes them out, hypothetically, like in the last few years, have died very seriously.
I think this was right. I think this was an older idea, but anyhow, so you had this American Medical Association coming up sometimes in the early 20th century, and they basically kicked out all the naturopaths and started with the allopathic medicine. So the point I want to make is that when I did this research, and I mean, that guy he was talking about intermittent fasting, and for example, he wasn't vegan or whatever, but had quite a few interesting approaches. and now Exert is just disconnected. Probably this happens.
And he's
Well,
back.
here we are again. So just to finish up the point, American Medical Association naturopaths. So this one guy that then I found somewhat trustworthy, at least, was a naturopath who was like over 90 years old and gave nutritional advice. So there I was like, well, at least you survived that long and still are somewhat healthy. So maybe that's something one can go by when trusting individuals, is always looking at their energy, at their attitude. And if they have some age, well, see how well they got through to that point. But of course, the issue you mentioned, Andreas, in terms of many doctors also being, let's say, silenced because they offer alternative ideas, also, of course, is an issue we're facing. And the last point is, just because you mentioned this simulation by our lovely Bill Gates, as far as I understand, he's also heavily involved in the whole vaccination idea.
Right, and vaccinations are really interesting because this is another reason why the word hoax is kind of harsh, because it's like, well, if they're a hoax, then what's the harm in a vaccination? It wouldn't do anything. So clearly, there's more to it than it's nothing. There's something there, and they want everyone to be forcibly altered in some way that would cause a change in the way your blood reproduces DNA, because DNA is actually making these electrical explosions. If you start to change that, that's a mutation. What is it for? And it might be useful for whatever reasons. People have talked a lot about sensorial parasites that live in your receptors and near your mind, especially, and actually control the signal and impulses that you're getting. If we're getting to a point
There's
where
a bug that does that in the Amazon. It causes its prey to like drown itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and this is the thing. The Amazon's an interesting point actually because it connects to all of this. The doctor I was about to say earlier, the doctor to trust is this half Chinese, half indigenous Quechua witch doctor in Peru that I met. That's the only doctor to trust because they have all the oldest, most ancient Chinese medicine to deal with swine and avian flus because that's where a lot of the flus actually come from, and
Which
also
makes the whole Bible's prohibition against, bacon
yeah,
kind of
there
more wise.
are moments when okay, so like historically, pig has been used to take out cultures as a biological warfare weapon more times than you could imagine. You
And
drop
I've heard they're
off
very genetically similar to humans.
Portuguese have dropped off, and a lot of people, Moors, people who wouldn't eat pigs, would drop off sickly pigs, and that were just completely parasitical, and then they would drop them off on islands and let them run ravage for a year. They'd come back, and then the people who had eaten them, the islanders, would have gone completely insane and killed themselves off for the most part, or had brain damage. Examples being Papua New Guinea, which has, I think we were talking last time, at 60 sexagesimal numbers like the Sumerians do, but otherwise you think of them as being pretty primitive because they fell apart once this
I don't know,
happened to
man.
them.
This guy named Bong and his tribe jumping off those high towers.
Right. No, I mean there's a lot of nobility to them, and it's an interesting tale about how parasites destroyed them.
You don't have to get all PC. Yeah, I was just saying. They still look like they have fun still, somewhat. Although it's kind of ratchet. It's like almost like Lord of the Flies 2.0 with those tribes. They're just going from hill to hill, kind of like keeping beef through generations for nothing, really.
Well, and that's the reason why they're saying to be careful about parasites like that make you insane. They give you neurocystic fibrosis, which is like one of the most common issues people have, really, is they have neurocystic fibrosis from eating bad pork. So there's a reason why, they said don't touch the bad acid, stay away from our crew are going to not eat that. That's what at that moment it's a war thing more than anything, not just a health thing.
So, pulling back a little, it's the 53rd episode. That's 8 numerologically, which is about kind of the infinite Lamb's Gate.
And the love bug, Herbie the love bug is 53.
Good call.
Just watched it, man.
Dude, I've seen a bunch of those. I forgot that existed. The one where he goes to Central America and deals with that huge coin.
Herbie goes bananas. That big coin is the actual Mayan calendar. He's actually dealing with the Mayan calendar in that episode. That's one of the most
Not
heavy
surprised.
episodes. Yeah. And they call him Ocho because 5 and 3 is 8. So it all syncs back.
Here we go. So this Ocho energy, this Lamon's Gate kind of Ouroboros, where do you guys feel? I mean, we could talk about kind of random stuff. I have some friends being like, here come the fucking disclosures and, 10-day blackouts and stuff. And I have some friends, wanting to kill themselves. So where are you guys actually in all this, and how do you think it's playing out without maybe putting too much money on it or whatever, but like where your head's at with the general world climate right now? I think he seems to laugh the most about it.
Well, it all depends. I think number one, as Andreas already mentioned, what I find most interesting is that since now we have one topic, apparently, that at least all the internet connected world seems to be speaking about, or at least in Western countries, whatever this may mean. So everyone is kind of through
we're
that.
all kind of online right now, more than normal anyway.
Yeah, and through that, everyone is kind of exposing their beliefs, but not only about this particular thing, which, can be interesting and it can be debatable, to what degrees these so-called viruses exist, what their actual function is, whether they can be transmitted the way it is portrayed, whether it's more a psychic phenomenon, whether it's ascension symptoms, whether there is disclosure happening, whether there is martial law and Orwellian state happening. All of these ideas can be debated and discussed, and there can be evidence for any and all of those. But what's equally interesting to me and much more important is who at this point manages to stay calm or to face the negative beliefs they may be confronted with, and who's just going crazy or who starts to police others in terms of what they should think or do.
Well, I'm open to a lot of interpretations. I'm not going to police anybody. In a way, I'd rather have more options on the table. Some of the hopeful ones I don't want to be too hopeful about, because enough, I don't know. The Q stuff's so weird where I'm like, it looks like I could doctor that or come up with this stuff myself. It's just so weird. But then at the end of the day, that's the most hopeful outcome of all this, I guess. Or those
Maybe.
kinds of vibes.
Why
Yeah,
is it
maybe.
necessarily hopeful? I mean, like the thing is, it used to sound great. It was like, let's take out all of the pedophiles that are real nasty. But if they're destroying the entire society to build a military state, we do have to discuss it before it's too late, and we're not allowed to discuss it anymore. And we're just supposed
But
to
these
go
things,
along
this
with
is where it
it.
gets real tricky, and I think Raphael is going to have a very different predisposition. But it's like we're getting to very limit states, like the limits of growth on a lot of things. So it's like I think we were going to. I have a feeling people run simulations of reality all the time. This is the softest way this could probably happen, in a sense. And it's
Well, that's
like
at least
That's
the perspective, because many, financial people, and of course all the gold, silver, and crypto people, and so on, and economics people that have some idea of historic context, have all been aware for a long, long time that this is not sustainable. And many, of course, are saying that whatever this may actually be, it certainly also is a cover for an economic reset, which, again, even though I'm not a big fan of keeping people in the dark and lying to people, given a certain general lack of
no, if you put
information
out
and
this
awareness,
kind of gray, like a fog of war in a sense, if you make people not sure what's going on, they're much less likely. In a way, it can create at least people to hunker down and just be like, let's worry about simple stuff. It could prevent. I could see a lot of the logic.
Well, did you see the newest QAnon post, by the way? I don't know if don't make it act like I'm the guy who pays attention to this. Come on. But like, so the newest, if you go to qmap.pub and you check out the newest posts, on, I think it was last night, he said, do not fear. And added a link. Oh, no way, really?
oh well, this is live. You
Come
can
on.
continue.
That is clearly I got cut off because we're talking about. Let's just pretend I don't care or know what this is. But I found out. Interesting, weird, right? Who cares? But the funny, amusing part was that he posted, "Do not fear," and then Q with a link to a YouTube video, and it is Future World Music Victory of Life, and it sounds like Tartarian, like harps and things like that. It was completely trippy. Like it was this.
Well, I think. Sorry, my brother called, so that's why it cut me out. I think in some weird way, like there's this nexus point. Not that this isn't always the case, but it's just very different now. Where it's like think of many timelines are potentially possible, and I'm just trying to figure out how to vibe with the best one.
The one you said was correct, though, that this is one of the many simulations. This is the one that seemed the least horrible. And that's not like a new idea to simulate. You can look at The Limits of Growth from 1971. It's a book written by the Club of Rome, published by the MIT scientists who used their supercomputers back in the 70s. And it blew my mind just to look at it and turn from a programmer's perspective, because you're like, wow, before you had object-oriented computer programming, you really figured out how to plug in these, different formulas into packets of objects. But their ideas were basically growth has to stop. We have to be careful about trade. We need to start isolating certain regions so that things can be backup stocks. And also, in terms of a resource economy, I think everyone kind of knew that was coming. The question was, is it going to be for your growth, or is it to be controlling your growth? If it's that they want to have the most powerful slaves they can because we're property and they want to refine their resources, then they want to have, look at Russia. You have a small population, a large
I don't
land.
know if you heard the podcast the other day, but like we're slaves anyway in America with the birth certificate and the whole.
Of course, yeah.
And
You're
just
numbered, but
briefly, as we speak about Club of Rome, just to mention that everyone should also check out like who's member of the Club of Rome, who is member there now, and what is their very basic philosophy of a scarcity mindset. So they may just be like the emergency fire control for their own system controllers, because even in school, funnily enough, I got confronted with that because I was interested in, the old type of technocracy and all kinds of things. And then one teacher said, oh, maybe you heard of the Club of Rome. And I was looking up, was like, oh, interesting. These wise people discussing and limits to growth. Oh, they could see into the future. Like, obviously, fossil fuels or whatever
Given
in the way we use it is not
Yeah.
sustainable. Exactly. Giving certain presuppositions. And I would say, probably not all have the same view inside that, but the overall picture coming out still seems somewhat misanthropic and population controlled style in contrast to just using proper tech and social systems and so on, that we could just, naturally keep evolving and populating the planet without needing to think of it in that, strange way.
Well,
but it's certainly an important puzzle piece.
There's a convergence of all of these things at once. So you've got, really Prince Bernhard, who did the Bilderberg Foundation, also created the World Wildlife Foundation. And he financed a lot of anime, such as Nausicaa, the film that's about the end of the world after a bunch of nuclear toxicity destroys everything, and the only thing that lives are giant bugs and quarantined little kind of like convents that people are living in, like after the plague. And so they've been thinking about it also since Charles Dawkins was working on, is that right? Richard Dawkins, sorry, the selfish gene concept, which is that genes love to repopulate themselves and consider any other genes a threat, which is not necessarily true, but it's an interesting idea. At least it uses that logic that they were saying, okay, we own everything now. We've already got that taken care of. We own everyone now, and now we have them in educational programs, which that sort of socialism goes back to Robert Owens. And it's all about corporatism, where the corporation educates you and you drink fluoridated water out of a trough so that you can run better races and your horse teeth work. And they don't care how your brain works necessarily. And if they do, then they'll grow you special. But for the most part, the idea is to make people into certain kinds of refined people that they can use for certain object.
I mean, it's very much materialistic biological programming. This is just how it works. So and it's not good or bad to a point, because I think we have to have archetypes and roles and functions and stuff to work. It seems like we're not just like women have menstruation and shit that tells them and cues them for this, that, and the other. Like it seems we have. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not just a blank
we're killing off that idea. Like we're taking women away from the menstrual cycle. We're turning them into Jonas Brothers. They're acting like 15-year-old boys. They have a higher testosterone, higher progesterone, and they have a lower estrogen. Men have higher estrogen and are having lower sperm counts. I mean, I think we all know.
Are you getting into Agenda 21 kind of stuff?
We already got into Agenda 21 was a long time ago. You know what I mean? Like this is after event 201. We're talking 12 Monkeys. We've done already. I mean, turning the freaking frogs gay. You know, like you've heard that. Like that was kind of the exaggeration of there are certain kinds of plastics that are making people more and more similar because in a dynamic in nature you have to have a dynamic that's very wide apart, which actually causes multiplicity. But in a closed quarters environment like a quarantine or living in a city, it actually people become less dynamic so as to not be so polar and magnetic because it causes actions and reactions. So people start to subdue these human tendencies of hyperhormonal aspects of themselves. So we're really trying to emasculate and defeminize a lot of our workers so they can be like the brave new world. And that's pretty scary because you're taking people also, this is funny, this happens all a generation after the last time. So everyone says they don't know what is going on because your grandparents just died. There's just no time, like really just as soon as they were sure everyone who lived through it's gone, then they're going forward with a repeat. It's pretty high. It's ironic, but it's not even funny because it's just
It's to
true.
be expected. You're saying it's
Yeah, it's
normal,
to be
but
expected.
it's not fun when the cookie crumbles. I guess. Well, I mean, in a weird way, if I want to pull optimistic or be contrarian to that point, like if you have people at the helm, I mean, and who knows at what level they actually have full disclosure of contact and all those kind of things, which I don't follow those rabbit holes personally. Usually, Raphael does more. Um, who knows? This might just be the easiest way to do this.
And the thing is, there's also technocracy involved, okay? Because like every time this happens, you have a military, but you also have machines. And this machine this time is AI, and it's transparency of government. So there's what's it called? Cum Jokes on Mars, I think is the South Park episode about the finale a couple years back where the girl has figured out how to read everyone's emails on the internet and see who and everything on the internet is about to become transparent. And so everyone's freaking out and so they're all under quarantine and they're all afraid and they're all living at their homes because the internet is about to show what messages they've been sending to each other on top of what the government's been doing. And so Elon Musk is working with this little girl to try to find out stuff, and then Cartman says you have to hide it. You have to destroy the whole system and have a reset, or else if everyone sees what's going to happen, women are going to take all the men and they're going to put them in, like joke and cum draining machines, and that's all men are going to be used for. And it's this kind of like Total Recall scene with Arnold Schwarzenegger that Cartman's revisiting. And it seems like that came out like kind of in the Simpsons sense, like came out to predict that we were going to have a quarantine, that people were going to be locked inside, that people were going to start freaking out about information that's being revealed. Like a WikiLeaks was the mouse. That's the name of the mouse in the show that Lemmy Winks has to fight. So they've kind of already like told us that there's going to be a point when the data will become available. And the question then is like, are humans going to elect another human, or who's to say we're even going to have an election in November? How optimistic are you that even makes sense? It's plenty reasonable that the police state continues. The Department of Justice just this morning said they want to suspend habeas corpus. Attorney General William Barr was talking with the Justice Department officials about suspending a number of the Constitutional Bill of Rights, like the entire Bill of Rights.
Which is where the rubber starts hitting the road for me, where I'm like, okay, I can love and light this all day and say that there's some Pleiadian army coming in to take out whatever. You know what I mean? Like, but at some point I'm like, wait, hold on. What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty gnarly. And again, with the whole Q sending like a song that's future music from a video game that sounds like it's about Tartaria. Oh, is it possible? Like, that we were talking about like how it's episode 53 and Herbie the Love Bug or Ocho, like that movie. Can I read a quick quote from that? Because the original screenplay for it was called Love, God, Man, Woman, Car, and it's all about artificial intelligence, and people don't really get that. The car is coming alive. So this is the scene. Water splashes, duck quacks. Well, then if everything you say about this car is true, it's already starting to happen. what's starting to happen? Us human beings, we had a chance to make something of this world. We blew it, okay? And another kind of civilization is going to take a turn. Give me a mill wrench. I'm sitting up on top of this mountain, right? I'm surrounded by these gurus and swamis and monks, right? And I'm looking at my stomach. I'm knocking back a little rice wine. I got some contemplation going. I could have told you all this was coming. Jim, it's happening right under our noses. We can't even see it. We take machines and stuff them with information until they're smarter than we are. Take this car. Most guys spread more love and time and money on their car in a week than they do on their wife and kids in a year. Pretty soon, you know what? The machine starts to think it is somebody. I'm not saying a mechanical thing can't be a friend. Like when I was broke one summer, there was this giant claw machine in the Sutro amusement park, and it would grab cameras and watches and drop them down the little hole to me, and I would hawk them and buy lunch. You follow me? But I think you were up on that mountain too long. No. Contrary-wise, the traffic light down the street hates my guts. I don't know why, but in the last 6 weeks I haven't caught anything but a stop signal. It makes me wait 6 seconds longer than anyone else, and I timed it. Things like that are happening to a lot of people. A lot of people. But the other people, they don't tell other people because they know other people would say, hey. That's the most, I think, is, there's a bit more about like the car being made of like whatever it is, but it's like this is the beginning, I think, of the machine. The machine is going to be replacing us.
What year did that drop?
The movie was that 1968 or 19 something like that.
I thought it was the 70s, but I could be wrong.
No, that's
that
Herbie
was
Goes
the
Bananas
first
is
one.
1973.
Yeah, which is the same year as like Dark Side of the Moon, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
People getting real heavy there.
Let me look that up to get to the exact. The script was written in like 1958 or something like that.
I was going to say, it sounds like a bunch of dated kind of people making jokes about things they kind of get an idea. They're like, we should have more heart. Yeah, let's talk about that later. Clank whiskey glasses, drive off in Cadillac. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't there, but they were at least like musing with the idea. Like, it's not, you know what I'm saying?
Well,
there's like a hippie film,
it's like,
but there's sentiment there.
It is. There it is. You've got the Volkswagen, and they're in San Francisco. I mean, it really was a hippie film, but the script was a beatnik script, and it's about like Shintoism and this guy who's realizing that there is Zen and there's energy in machines, and the power of intention is meaning that if you love these guys who love their car so much are creating something out of love, and so the soul of the thing isn't made from a war. It's made from love. And especially interesting is that they're using a Volkswagen Bug because the Volkswagen and the hippies, they've taken the death rune, they flipped everything upside down. They're trying to say that we're using these symbols opposite and we're putting power of intention into this. That's a good thing. So in a way, that little bug is Hitler. Like in the Boys in Brazil movie, like grown up with bananas. Herbie Goes Bananas.
Yeah, it's one that stuck out to me as a kid. I saw, and especially there's a scene, like we said, with a huge gold Mayan apocalypse going, sun disk or whatever it's going on the calendar, and it was raining in that scene and stuff. I don't know. I don't remember much of it, but anyway, we don't have to use much about it.
There's a I mean, real quick, there's a really rich man who wants to get the gold and doesn't realize the gold coin's cursed, and it talks about the plagues. So, I mean, it isn't like you're off topic by much. Like, the plagues that it refers to are the back tunes, that every generation there's been a kind of yuga that is ended. And that there were at least 6 that humans have experienced and 12 that the earth has experienced, which is interesting because they kind of make it sound like there are pre-human levels to evolution of civilization or of consciousness. But there are like 6 devastating plagues that have happened historically, more like 10 almost. I think we're at the 10th, right? Like you've got like the plague of Justinian, which is like the Byzantine plague in 541. And the Byzantine plague, you've got the story of the rats, and then Byzantine Empire falls apart. People are using vomitoriums, and everyone says it must be because of the sins, and so sadomasochism and solar worship that all happens then. And also the books get sent to the Irish, and the Irish and the Scottish Normans start trading it, and the Renaissance starts, and then starts the next plague. So then from that, the Black Death, and then a virulent strain of bubonic plague kind of hits Europe, and people remember the bubonic plague as the plague that quarantined houses, put X's on doors, people wouldn't go outside, people were afraid, people died out, poor people moved into these giant mansions. That's one of the reasons people believe in giants, is because there are tons of stories of folklore that after the plague, the giants died and people moved into their houses. Whether that's just a story, we'll find out maybe someday or not. There's also the Italian plague of 1629, which was like in Mantua, there was like 2 years of plagues that were, there were snakes associated with it, which is really interesting because the Great Plague of London also, which ended in the fire of 1666, is associated with the snakes of St. Patrick. And St. Patrick's why people wear green at St. Patrick's Day in America. I don't know if you guys do that, but in Ireland, they totally do it. I'm pretty sure you've been to a bar. If you don't wear green, you get pinched on St. Patrick's Day. Well, this year there was, for the first time in 300 or 400 years at least, this is the first time there hasn't been a St. Patrick's pinch. So that's really stripped of like value. Like people aren't really talking about what that means. Like St. Patrick's Day is about keeping alive the spirit of St. Patrick, who defeated the snakes, and the snakes rose up out of the ground. And I'll get into like that as a metaphorical plague in a minute, but just in terms of like plagues that people recall, the Great Plague of London is one of the most important. That was the one that was defeated by fire and gin and tonic, but it also ended with Charles II leaving, and James I, which James I is his brother. He didn't have any kids. Well, he had 10 bastards, but he had no legitimate kids, and he converted to Catholicism on his deathbed, which is gnarly because they had just gone through a puritanical revolution. They kicked out all of the kings. England was a republic without a king after 2 civil wars. Then they asked the king back, cut off Cromwell's head. He was a Lord Protectorate. Killed his son because he didn't want anybody to be like a prince. And then he didn't have anybody, so his brother becomes king. And so but like for a while he defends liberty. Libertarianism, libertinism is really like the time of you can do without wilt. Witch hunts were illegal. You couldn't burn witches alive anymore. Like it was all about committing whatever debauchery you wanted. People were having sex in the streets and in the parks and in the manure, and people were getting syphilis and dying. And so from this liberty, James took over, and he put in, as a Catholic, the Bible, the King James Version Bible. So it's directly associated with this plague and with this fire, and also with the change of history. Then there's the Great Plague of Marseille in 1720, which, that led to France basically falling apart. And then where the Napoleonic Empire really is, responsible is after the Jacobins, so there was a definite end to society. And then the third plague pandemic, which happened after in Yunnan. So in 1855, China had this brutal plague called the Third Plague Pandemic, which makes you think about, what are the other two that the Chinese were referring to? But about 100 million people died in China, and all the Manchurians eventually died of the flu afterwards. But this plague led to another plague, which is the San Francisco plague. And no one really talks that much about how San Francisco had its own plague. But in 1900 to about 1905, the bubonic plague hit San Francisco through Chinatown, supposedly. But this is another example of like how sure are we of anything, because San Francisco was already advanced. By 1904, start looking at some videos of San Francisco. They had electric trolley systems, lights, municipal free transit machines.
There's a good video on YouTube of Air, the band, French duo, La Femme d'Argent, and it's got a mashup to a 1908, I believe, right before the Great Fire, I think right before or right after, I can't remember.
Wow,
I think right before. Just on a, motion picture, and it's just another world.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of other places too, like Hong Kong, Honolulu, anywhere that had a Chinatown. And so Honolulu lost, thousands of people, and they burned about 40 acres of Chinatown. The whole thing was just destroyed, completely burned down. And in San Francisco, there was this earthquake, and there was a giant fire, and the Great Fire, and the earthquake both. We're having earthquakes right now. I think everyone in Europe who's listening probably already knows about Zagreb, and I hope that everyone's reached out to everyone that they can and try to do something about it, because it's pretty serious, actually. Like at 5 o'clock in the morning, I think. I don't want to say the time if I'm wrong, because it could be that I was on the wrong side of the planet, but it sounds like it was in the middle of the night, but it was cold, and everyone had to leave the hospitals and go stand out in the streets, who were already being told that they had to be quarantined. So we're having these earthquakes, we're having pestilence. You saw the giant black clouds of locusts across Africa, the biggest in a century. Things run in numbers together is the thing. It's not just one virus or another infection, or
I'm
it's
curious to
all
know
of it.
what Raphael's thoughts on all this are because he tends to be way more optimistic about things in general. So, what are you thinking, Raphael?
Well,
Not that you're being a
again,
bad thought. It's fine, and I'm not. But I'm just sitting here thinking, it's like, how do you view these things?
well, even here, it would depend on your take on prophecy as to whether these things happening are positive or negative, or whether they are just a necessary step in the quote unquote predictions. Of course, I'm a big proponent in that sense of the idea that you always decide for yourself what you give credence to, what parallel reality you want to switch to, no matter what apparently happens within the so-called outside. And in regards to what you mentioned, Andreas, we have at least one contact in Kenya, I believe, and asked about it a month ago, and there was no mention of any, plague or anything like that in terms of locusts. And even if these things happen concurrently, I would also just ask the question, could it also be that to a certain extent there is now just more focus on and hype on certain ideas because so
Well, do
many
you think
things are happening all the time everywhere, and as we know through media, it is very much dependent on what is actually being broadcast in terms of how aware we become of it, because many things happen and it's not broadcast, so it's almost like it didn't even happen to most people.
so? It's reasonable to say, like, okay, the media is getting okay. Think of it like this. Sure, the media right now is really bad about it's very negative. Okay, was the media? Do you remember ever in your life the media being less negative? Though, really, like it's always been this negative. It's just that right now there's more things for them to talk about that are actually negative, but they constantly are searching for somebody who beat their baby or a dog that bit
Oh,
a
sure,
child.
but we
So
also know
why are
they're
we
searching
now?
for it or they're making it
Yeah,
up, which is also
there's
well documented in terms of
totally,
manufactured news. So that's
which
just
makes you
something to
think that.
be aware of.
But if they have photos of things right now, they're going to use them. So this is the thing: people they're feeding off of it and they're eating a lot. So right now is a time when there's a lot of things going on that there are documentable, and the photos of the people suffering. Those are the kinds of things that they would want to publish if they had. So the fact that you haven't seen that yet makes you also like wonder, like, where's that? But instead, what you're seeing is earthquakes, you're seeing locusts and frogs and things like that. So that to me is kind of interesting. It's either that the media is trying to manufacture literal biblical plague symbols, or that they don't understand them. And I remember as not that I like to ride this.
We should talk about the Illuminati card game for a second, but keep going with what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I was gonna say not that it at best it's name dropping, and at worst it's self-incriminating. But as I said, I used to work for NASA and CNN, so I'm familiar with a lot of the people that work in these things that have very earnest intentions, very optimistic perspectives, very blinded, consequential judgment because they think that things are going to be taken care of by the right people, so they're willing to work on these things. And they're very absent from the metaphor or the archetypes. They don't remember Bible verses. They don't know these stories. And yeah, also very little obsession with the Illuminati card game. Not very many of them seem to like really care about that stuff.
Oh,
So
sure.
you've also
Just
you've got
briefly, very briefly, what's also obvious is in these organizations, you have varying layers of hierarchy. And one simple example, an interview given by a former journalist who also worked then briefly at the Austrian press agency. And for one day, because her boss got sick, got promoted to actually selecting the news, which came through the press agency. And she was immediately reprimanded because she just somehow chose differently. So all I just want to point out again is that only because you have one layer of managers that have no clue, and you must have the quote unquote useful idiots, doesn't mean that how it's getting handed to them, whether through so-called diplomatic, scientific, secret service, or official press agency channels, you have enough other choke points where ideas and things can be inserted and then played off the, self-directed belief system, which may be somewhat distorted, which is then honestly and earnestly propagandizing in that regard, which is easy to do because, as we understand Jesuits and so on, and the whole idea of education, you already got them through college. You got enough time to pre-brainwash them, so you can put them there and they don't even need to know. Just to, not saying this or that is the case, but just to point out that these ideas are not mutually exclusive.
No, actually, that's exactly the point. That's literally, and that's why the Illuminati card game. So, like, if you're thinking about like the people not having an idea what they're posting, and they're just posting because they're trained to keep news flowing, and that they know that people will react negatively. YouTube doesn't care if you plus or minus next to a thumbs up or a thumbs down. The more you engage is all. They don't care what number of they add them both together and they say, okay, these are the number of engagements. But in terms of the information, well, I think Robert Anton Wilson said that the history of the world at the beginning of the Illuminati trilogy, he says the history of the world is the secret battle between secret societies, or maybe not even the secret battle, just the battle,
which is
between
basically
secret
Dark
societies.
Crystal and Twin Peaks. Keep going.
And also what Rudolf Steiner talks
exactly.
about, and so on.
And it's the opposite of the Lord of the Fellowship of the Rings. It's the exact same format as the Hunger Games. No, is that the other one? Hunger Game of Thrones. But they've set up a bunch of people that don't really know what they're doing to fight against each other instead of working together because it's amusing. And if they work together, then they turn off the game. So this is a way for them to get people to work, like to pit against each other. And have they done that before? Well, clearly. Like look at bear fighting, where they tie a double-sided noose around two bears and they wrestle them. These are the same people that would pit chickens against each other, or children and prisoners. And so we have Russian kickboxing in prison. Like this is a
it's
concept.
well exhibited in Django, which is a Tarantino film.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a number of good Django's too from Spain and Italy that are about that. But the Illuminati card game. So Robert Anton Wilson made a book series. He used to work for Playboy magazine. Playboy magazine just shut down. They might shut down for good. This is another thing. If you go to resignation.info, you can see that in terms of the QAnon thing, 12 or 13,000 names of CEOs that have stepped down from their positions. Not just Bill Gates from Microsoft, but also him. And people like the CEO of Google were replaced. A lot of these major companies were hit first, but some of these smaller ones, like Match.com, like these people are stepping down. And even the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, like leaders, everyone's being switched. Simultaneously, the human trafficking executive order and the executive order to take over businesses. So the government can commandeer any business now in the United States and make it do whatever they want. And soon they can take you. I mean, they can already. They just haven't really. Well, they can take you and say, "Hey, can you work? What can you do for us? Nothing. Okay, here's a shovel. Dig yourself a grave." Like that's the level,
which is fairly
of authority.
dystopian. But at the
That's
same
the
time,
level
if
of
one
authority.
is
That
to
doesn't
try
mean
to
that's going to happen.
drain the swamps, quote unquote, this is how one would do it, I guess. That's why I'm like not into Q, but I look at it like an option on the table still somehow.
Well, the interesting thing,
it's the best. It'd be nice if it was really good.
Yeah, I mean, again, of course, I'd agree in many ways. It'd be nice because even here, the authority, very much the question how it would be directed. Even here, who knows if we say that, there are...
Well, if we're going to go with the full retard with the Q thing, they're waiting on, I guess, John F. K. Jr. to come out of the woodwork or some shit, and he's calling shots?
So some people believe that, but I think Q said that wasn't true. Then other people said, well, Q was just saying that, and that you can't trust, that he's not always speaking in code.
I wouldn't doubt if Q is a psyop on the side. That's how I've always felt about it.
I mean, one way or another,
flat earth stuff.
One way
so
it is a psyop.
The fact that I'm even looking that way for hope is sad to me. That's why I'm like trying to get out of LA and go to Colorado. Well, it's like if things have to go down, at least I have the Arkansas River in my backyard, and I'm up at 14,000 foot mountains. I could figure something out and grow, like up there. Because but that's such fear talking. Because today it goes in waves. But for the past week or two, since I've been in LA, really since this whole situation started going down, I've had weird ascension symptoms. So has my roommate who's not here now, but Judith. To the degree where it's been like, are we sick? No, we're not at all, because there's no fever. There's no, it's like this kind of stuff. We're just like, what the fuck? So I'm not sure what the fuck is going on, quite frankly.
well, let's talk about California outside of, inside of the Q spectrum and outside of the viral quality. So if you use this virus as a lie, and we're saying, okay, this is not even real, it's just a tool.
It's a
being
flash
used to quarantine.
grenade to distract while we do other shit. Is the idea, I guess.
Yeah. Then California is ground zero, because
Clearly.
New York City is pretty bad. But it's going to be something very personal to Trump in New York City. So it's something that I think it's going to go pretty hard as well, and it's already at the point where there's thousands of people with it. So martial law in New York City is inevitable, probably within the next 48 hours. I think we all know that. California as a state, well, think of it like Biden, didn't want, like, there's nobody else to put up there because everyone else is in war tribunals. And where's he been for the last week? He's been pretty quiet. So it's probable that, like, they ran out of faces and they're going to put him and Michelle Obama in the front and hope that they won. But it was like there was nothing else to do. Similar Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom's the governor of California. He's a young, drugged out, drug smuggling, corrupt in every respect. I mean, he's the evolution of corruption to a fault of supremacy. He's
which is a big
soul.
reason why I'm not into Q, because I'm like, Trump doesn't have any moral character and he's an asshole and he plowed his way. Seems like a Trump type.
Gavin Newsom though is different though. So Gavin Newsom all Gavin Newsom did was, he's a young guy whose parents and grandparents and great-grandparents have probably always been interstate actors and involved with the mob and with smuggling during the Prohibition. And it goes, it's a lineage thing. Like, he's been put into power because A, he's the guy who's trained to do it, but B, everyone above him jumped ship. They're like, I don't want to be in that position. So he's the dumb enough guy to not realize what was coming. And not enough. And so they put him in he's thinking, oh yeah, well, I'll make it. And also they were telling him, don't worry, we're going to move the deep state to California. I mean, not like it wasn't there, but everybody else had to go there. Like, they were blowing up houses in suburbia in Boston with Hillary's servers, and Hillary's house caught on fire in Connecticut. And I was in Connecticut, so it was kind of like, whoa, like, everyone started going towards California. And then California became like where the CIA, deep state, the NSA have all kind of put up after the DEWs, with the fires, California fires. California is where everything is now, and they're having an Autobahn. Like, we have like a federal
and
speed limit.
Silicon Valley, Stanford Research Institute, all the good stuff is there. Lockheed Martin, everything
Right.
is in California. No,
When I said defense, that's what I meant. I'm sorry. Like, yeah, Silicon Valley is where the military built, also its largest remote viewing lab, and Raytheon and Lockheed in Santa Cruz with all of our jets. The nuclear laser technology and Oculus and Facebook, like, Zuckerberg moved into my best friend's backyard. He lives in the house right across from him in Santa Cruz. Like, Santa Cruz is totally taken over. California is completely under the control of this internationalist, long-term planning, familial planning, generational planning, military state, which has a lot to do with the Navy and the way it works and operates. A lot to do with pirates and Sir Francis Drake and the Dutch East Indies Company. And these are the same families, like these Italian and Dutch and Dutch-Spanish families that have been in power, are what we consider the mob in the United States. And the mob is very important. I don't want to get in trouble by saying too many things, but in California, let's just say, like, you can go to pretty much any coastal city and you'll find the police station is either built onto or right next to the most important family that runs the oldest harbor restaurant, right? Like, so if they have a harbor restaurant, they have a fishing boat. And if a fishing boat, they have access to human trafficking, bringing in people without papers, and also to gray market, black market drugs, gray market electronics. And so and then they have shipping industries too along, Louisiana and California. So there's all these families that are pretty important, and Gavin Newsom is part of one of them. There's a lot of other ones that it's more dangerous to mention because they haven't been out in the limelight, but I think everyone kind of knows what's going on with Gavin Newsom. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a war. California's police are going to go home at some point. This is what usually happens in any play out of this disaster, is at a certain point when they realize that it's ridiculous, then they're going to go home and be with their families. And when that happens, then the police state's over. That's when the military state begins. And California is already set up. We have trains everywhere. Check out all the buildings, the municipal buildings, the buildings that by law they have to be built a certain way because people are using them for corporations or they're using them for public works. They're almost all built by a guy who also built the local prison and also built the local, like defense structure for the Senate building or the judge building.
That's funny. My middle school is Byrd, which is named after a senator, and it's also, I think we're the Senators, if I'm not mistaken. And our middle school is designed by a guy who did prison design.
Well, they had to be. Think of it like it's not. I mean, it sounds unique, right? But it isn't. It's just a good example. Everywhere you go, you're going to find parking structures are built, and Greyhound bus stations are built. And this is the FEMA fatale story, of course, is that you get chicken mesh and you line it around a parking structure, and it makes a great containment and human processing facility. And when you start to say these people are different because these people are sick, so they're different, and they're going to harm your family. It doesn't matter whether they want to or not. Then we're back to dehumanizing like the way we used to in the 1600s. So it
tribalism
makes it so much,
and all that jazz.
So much easier, yeah. So people will be scared for their lives, and humans will be wearing masks to cover, their faces, so they won't. The military will, so they will not be, like hurt, but also they will not be seen. So this is the biggest issue, I think, with this kind of panic, is how society reacts, regardless of whether or not it's necessary.
Right. What I would say is let's do a 3-minute break and actually play the song as posted by Q on March 22nd, 2020 at
I am curious.
3:32 a.m. Well, number magic, always good with Q, so we only got 2s and 3s on that one. Well, enjoy and be right back. Rabbit Hole Edition 53. Sociopathic social distancing plague. Well, this was Future World Music Victory of Life, as posted by Q with the quote, "Do not fear," interestingly enough.
I don't know if that's the quality of their entertainment department. That sounded like some baby boomer on Xanax, like getting their musical cues from like Game of Thrones and
What baby
Command
boomer
and Conquer.
plays? What baby boomer plays that? That's the thing. I don't know if a baby boomer plays that game. What game was that again? It's
Command and Conquer or something, Age of
Yeah.
Empires vibes. It had this,
Yeah.
I don't know, it was very uninspiring to me. I was like, holy shit, if that's the kingdom, I think that's, but whatever, it is what it is. I'm kind of laughing because at the end of that, I was just like, this is okay. I mean, what are your guys' thoughts on the song? We can mock it or not for a second. I thought, like, if you're gonna have like Age of Aquarius shit, like DJs or something, I don't know. Don't ask. I feel like that was not representative of the vibe that's potentially coming from whatever they're trying to push for.
I mean, it seems it has that kind of weird angsty, like it's constantly going
Oh, it
up.
sounds like Ron Paul crowd.
Yeah.
Like you'd hear that in a Ron Paul like fundraiser like back in the day.
Yeah, well, there you go. I guess it's also a question of, like mass appeal and so on. But I was actually more angling for the idea of, do not fear, which we of course know is the most common Bible quote. And regardless of any speculation in all possible timelines, to me, truly, in the end, still appears to be the most important thing. Like, we can speculate all day and look at different evidence and get certain clues, even just as we briefly mentioned before the show, the idea of potentially Twitter and Google kind of getting unrigged, or at least rigged in a different way. But then still it
Loosened.
comes down to
Well,
the idea of, love or fear. Always.
You
It's
want
always the
you
only
want
question.
something you want something that'll freak you out and make you love life. You gotta know that the composer for that song, Armin Hambart, was the musical department director for Crossroads, the movie. And I don't mean the I really
The Britney
wanted to.
Spears one?
I really, really want to mean that, but no,
That
there's
would've been epic.
that would have been really good.
It's like I feel justified in my critique.
No, it's
I
about a
stand by it.
It's about a father and husband trying to come to terms and forgiveness with the murder of their family. And it's kind of interesting because it's all about this weird concept of forgiveness. Also, he did Room 19, which is like a horror film about like a dude who sees his dead daughter and constantly comes back to find, the ghost of her and stuff. So he's been doing a lot of really weird, kind of horror,
It's like, hey Q,
supernatural
you guys need like a
ghost.
soundtrack? I got
Yeah,
you.
so it's kind of a weird
IMDb me.
choice by that purpose, and like apparently it's not from a video game. I always thought it was. I was like, it sounds like it is, but it's just made for video. It's
It sounded like a
future music.
goddamn start screen
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it sounds like Horizon Zero Dawn.
from like 1997.
Okay, not Horizon Zero Dawn, but yeah, it had that Sony
Horizon Zero
PlayStation
Dawn
1.
is epic. That shit moves me. My brother was listening. He said he was studying to that soundtrack and like getting moved to tears because he knows the story. Dude, and the Horizon Zero Dawn, the story itself is very apocalyptic and stuff. So I'm just like, I don't know where we're at, but Raphael's right. Where I'm just trying to pull back to the point where, whether asteroids, which there are apparently 4 in the app, there's just a lot going on that is stressful, and it makes one want to try to learn techniques to center and calm.
Speaking of card games that keep us calm, and I didn't.
Illuminati card game.
I was gonna. I was, but there's one. Once I said that segment,
No, we
I
should talk
realized
about
that's
that
not.
because I don't know. I've seen him before. Raphael, do you know what we're talking about?
Oh, yes.
Oh
Alright.
yeah.
So in the
Well,
mid '90s, apparently.
Did I send you the whole deck ever? Have I sent you a copy of the whole deck?
Oh,
No,
kindly
need
do.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm like,
totally.
give me.
Because this hasn't really been available from my searches so far.
Aw, baby. I have the German cards too. Aw.
Andreas is like a
Aw.
fucking a fucking crossroads.
I actually have all of the cards physical back in California.
No
and
way.
Yeah, well, but I also after that, like the Pleasantville movie, became real easy to fill them in, and then I put them online. I have a secret link I'll send you at some point, but don't say that I did that. But yeah, okay, they do exist. Here's the deal, though. Before we get into that, there's another game I want you to know about. It's called Gin Rummy and Bridge. You guys know about Bridge?
Heard about it.
Okay, so the most important card game, let me put that differently. Bill Gates' favorite card game, and his favorite thing to do is play cards. If you don't remember from Solitaire, like the one thing included with 1995's Windows, was that he loves cards. He's colorblind, which is another reason why he didn't control a rainbow apple and have you have like different. You could pick whatever color you wanted for your customized things. Because he didn't see it, he didn't care, didn't think it was important. But what did matter to him was Bridge. And so Bridge is a game. You use 52 card deck. You have a pile of cards. Everyone pulls a card. They have to, you draw a card. You have to throw away a card, and you start putting together these sets. And there's different kinds of sets. Whether the set is 3 threes, or 1, 2, 3 of spades, or all of the spades of 3, or hearts, or of diamonds. All of the different threes of different sets. Like these different kinds of meta tags. This is the basis, I think, for a lot of how meta tags work, is that they're like, well, there could be different sets that they go into. So Bridge is one of the most important games, and at some point learn to play it, because you're going to be alone at some point in quarantine, and you're going to want to play Bridge with people. But if you're good at Bridge, the harder game to play, and people say Bridge is the hardest game on the earth, but that's because they don't know that there's actually a harder game, and that's the Illuminati card game. And so some of you have seen every once in a while a pizza mask or a pizza piece or building 9/11 being blown up, like there's a card for everything. There's 400. It's not
Even there's 400?
409, plus there's about a dozen German cards that are specific. Plus, I've made a few myself.
With the cackle.
No,
Great.
I didn't. Yeah, with the cackle, but I didn't make the frog.
This is like
card.
young Mr. Bird's parallel timeline. He's like, and I made some myself. In any event, so
Well,
hold on,
that's the
400
whole.
cards.
That's an important point.
Which part is the most important point? That I made them, or what?
Yeah, well, that we realize, I mean, keep talking about it, but that we realize that we have the power to, manifest our own destiny just as well.
Oh,
But
yeah,
it's good
yeah.
to know what whoever laid out. So kindly continue with the
Oh,
exploration.
it's disturbing.
No, that's a great point. So you're right. It is a good point. So most people haven't made their own cards. I've made my own cards because I'm good at it, and also I played the game a lot. I know how to make cards that would work in the system, and it's a specific kind of way that people play that they can add new events to the system once you understand it, and that follows the most German of principles, Ordnung, and I would describe it in a more American sense. The rules are the rules you can break. So if you understand the game, you can cheat, but it's not cheating anymore, because this game is all about that's the whole point. You're supposed to win, and you're supposed to take over the world, and you're competing against things like the Vatican or the aliens or the Church of Subgenius is been added because there wasn't a Church of Subgenius originally, but the Church of Subgenius,
Which is
so
essentially
large.
like Chaos Magician.
Yeah, but there's also the Discordians, which were already a card. So there's I would say Discordians are even more Chaos Magicians, and Subgenius are well, no, I wouldn't say they're not.
They're almost like beer. It's like SNL meets Chaos Magicians for Church of Subgenius.
It's like it's like the Mad TV version of Chaos. But there's also chance cards, and there are confluent interests. So you'll have libertarians, Boy Scouts, lawyers, Las Vegas. These are kinds of things. TV preachers could come on TV, and that could affect you. And time warps, Trekkies, like these, like things that people that are addicted to video games, people that have
Pandemics.
Yeah, well, those are. First, I'm just talking about the chance cards, these are rectangular cards. It's a whole other aspect of the game, are the rectangle cards, versus they're like hamburger versus vertical cards. Normal baseball style cards, like Obama's drone mission cards, were based on the Illuminati card game. They used to make baseball cards. Obama dropped a bomb every 8 minutes his entire term on somebody, and those were decided by baseball cards, which had stats based on the status value of these operatives, and then they would drone them. So they were taking out all these people, kind of automatically. Well, there's a drone card, there's a Brazil card, there's a CIA card, and these cards are like Pokemon, kind of. They have Charismatic leader. This card may be played at any time and counts as an action for the group it affects. The increased power takes effect immediately because they have a charismatic leader now. The power for one fanatic group is increased up to 6. Link this card to your chosen fanatic group. Now, that means is that you start out the game by having a team. You could be, the aliens or the Vatican or whatever. You can be all of these different teams, and each one of them is trying to take over the world at the same time. The clubs, the gnomes of Zurich, in the mines of the money. That's one of my favorite teams to play. Also, like UFO aliens, is another good team. But then you start attaching to each one of those groups, fanatic groups that are obsessed with you. Whether you got video game people obsessed with you because you are aliens, or you have religious fanatics obsessed with you because you're the Vatican and you're the Jesuits and the mafia, and you figured out how to get people on televangelists using, Vegas, not Las Vegas and Los Angeles Italians to make your TV show for these Protestants, and controlling the American Protestants through libertinism. This is part of the game. So it has every thing in it. I think we didn't quite get through the whole story. So Robert Anton Wilson was working for Playboy magazine, and they just shut down Playboy magazine. It's not going to be running anymore. But back in the 70s, when he was part of it, he was an editor, one of the most important editors, and he had a conspiracy theory section in Playboy. And you know how people sometimes joked, I don't know if you do, that people would read Playboy for the articles? I still download old Playboys and read them for the articles. Clearly there's better pornography. That's not the reason to do it. It's cool, but the most important part is that you have like Paul McCartney talking about LSD, the first time he took it, and things like that. So the most unusual information was available through Playboy magazine and the articles. So what he said was, as an editor, I'm going to make a conspiracy theory section, send into Playboy you dirty old men and young kids who have got this, because there's also kids that were like 10 that had these subscriptions and their parents kind of like couldn't deal with it and they let them. Send in the craziest conspiracies you've ever heard and I'll write about them. And he got so many insane and legitimate conspiracies, like actual things going on in the military, things from people that were like deep throat, but also just like people who believe that the Ford car used to be named Fjord. And they called it Fnord in the book, but it's the idea that there is secret Berenstain Mandela effect things. And people are talking about Atlantis and the ancient laws that used to be do what thou wilt until they were do what's right and don't do what's wrong. And so all of these things came into being. He created a trilogy called the Illuminatus trilogy. And it's a very important trilogy, I would say.
I have that book, Dune, and Finnegan's Wake, and a bunch of like Joseph Campbell analyses waiting for me in Colorado. So I'm kind of I want to read it.
One time I parked my car and I got out and I dropped my pipe and it shattered. And on the floor, on the ground, I found in front of UCSC, Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, Future Shock, two cake CDs. One with Satan is My Motorcade, and with one chair pulled away from the other 3 Trinity chair at the table, so Cake's about the devil. And then also the Illuminatus trilogy. And so the Illuminatus trilogy has always been important. Also, when I was a kid in Santa Cruz, I met Robert Anton Wilson once and Anton LaVey in Capitola, because they used to hang out at Mr. Toots when I was still hanging out with my church group. And I had a friend from church who was goth, and we'd go to the coffee shop. So I was around Robert Anton Wilson and Anton LaVey back when it was, back when California was so free, you could do anything, and it was actually kind of you'd even question like, well, are the Christians are pretty much committing a bunch of crimes? You have pedophiles in the Catholic Church, and the Satanists are doing daycare. So you do the math, and who you're gonna hang out with. The thing was that Robert Anton Wilson always seemed like the better deal because he was cynical, and so he didn't believe that anybody was good. They were all kind of vying for power, but also that every individual had goodness in them until they were corrupted. So later on, there's a card game made based on basically everything that was sent through Playboy magazine, all these crazy ideas about, and real things that were happening. and they put together, a card for everything. Like, what happens when there's no beer? We're out of what? Disaster. This is an instant attack to destroy any place. There's no beer. It does not require an action. The power of 16 normally. Against Australia, Germany, or Texas, its power is 24. Against France and Italy, its power is only 8. So, like, the lack of resources, it's not just about resources, it's also about vices. And so it talks about what happens when people have these vices.
It's like a Magic the Gathering chaos mapping of potentials of what we're experiencing now, which gets really tricky because Alan Green of the Sync Book, who we had on for the 42nd episode, had a little vignette about how basically people who wrote the script for Loose Change were trying to make it a fictional, or maybe I'm misquoting on Loose Change, but basically there's a documentary about 9/11 that wasn't supposed to be true, and it ends up they writing into it, and it's like what becomes art becomes life becomes art. It gets very tricky really quick, which is why I think I'm fascinated by that Illuminati card game, but it's also something I wouldn't really necessarily want to own.
I mean, it's useful to an extent. Most everything that's happened in the game has already happened at one point or another. So it's not like, but it depends. Maybe you don't want to know about things that have happened in the past, but things have happened in the past happen again. So it's usually useful, I think, to know what's happening. I don't know.
Which is kind of what Lost is about, the show, where it's like it's always the same story of backgammon or whatever, but
Right.
It's just in different time spaces.
Also, I think Alan Green has a very, he's a very specific perspective after what
Understatement.
he's been through. Yeah, after what he's gone through, whom he's become, who he is. Like I love the guy, but I also think that he looks at things kind of like, and you have to understand a lot of people that came out of the Secret Sun, like Christopher Knowles' group. And
I was just thinking about the Secret Sun today and wondering what they were going to say about all these going on, but I'm too afraid to look at what he has to say because that shit was too. I was like, either he gets it or he's a fucking crazy guy.
Well, okay, he indexed the group right when Trump was elected. So
I didn't know that.
What happened
I saw it right before that.
It's been gone. It's been gone for 4 years. And what he did was he said, I'm shutting this down because it's not doing what I want it to. And this is the irony with magicians, and something that really needs to, I don't care, I'll say it. They should be slapped upside the head with some chaos magic if they don't get what they're doing is going to have different repercussions than their intentions. I mean, if you want to pave a road to hell, you pave it as slick as possible with good intentions. I'm sorry. It's end of discussion. Like, it's just the way it works, and it just blows my mind how many magicians can be either enthusiastic to a fault and not realize the consequences of their actions are outside of their control, or they can be so like, I didn't want this, because like that really boggled my mind looking at the Secret Sun group, everyone stepping away after Trump was elected. Like, wait a second, this is not what we wanted. I'm like, yeah, but you love chaos, you love magic, look what you eat it. That's kind of
careful what you wish for.
Yeah, like seriously, like, and then they're like, okay, we're gonna shut it down. Okay, so wait a second, what are you gonna shut down? What are you even gonna shut down? You're gonna turn off your Facebook group, other people are gonna go into other groups, and everything's gonna continue? Now you're just gonna say that you're gonna try to disassemble something that you have no power over? Do you think you ever had power over this? And so a lot of people are very upset because they're like, oh, well, we wanted to do this spell against Trump, and like there are people killing dogs during that spell. Like there are people like literally that were crazy evil that were associated with the anti-Trump rituals that were killing dogs because of the Sirius star. And they're like, oh, we're not doing it. It's like, okay, but you're associated with them and you're putting out your hex on the internet and it's being published by your own minions who are, maybe they're not communists, but they're witch secret agents inside of journalists. And they're like, oh, how funny is this? This is the anti-Trump spell. And they publish it on the front page of the Times and everything else. Come on. Like, clearly, you're still interfering. So like at some point, either learn what you're doing is not having you controlled by you, or keep doing it because God's will be done anyway. But it's like, oh my gosh.
Well, speaking of gods, I just saw a preview for Westworld 3, which I haven't seen past season 1. I need to get up on it. Corey, I'm forgetting his name. It's Kaplan, our friend. he's doing stuff on that all day. But it's like, I guess, the original Matrix is this West world, like kind of Disneyland for cowboys. They get out of that, and then they're in the human world. I guess I haven't seen second season, but now it's like apparently the gods are coming back. They're saying, and all these weird things, which made me wonder how much. I haven't seen American Gods, but it's wonder how much all of these kinds of the way we think about things creates kind of like chimeras of energy. So whether it's real ultimately or not doesn't even all somewhat matter. So like if enough people believe an idea, it's real kind of thing. Not to be cynical, but I mean, but at some point, sometimes that happens. And it's interesting because of the ideas we've been trying to, basically the psychic monsters we've created for the past few thousand years, we're having to deal with right about now, it seems.
Yeah, I think that the collapse of a lot of things though is kind of like in when DJs play a song and then it stops and people don't have any song to hear, they start screaming. So we have a record start before the other record stops, and the record's clearly winding down. So the next record's already almost on. Before long, they'll be playing at the same time, and then the last record will go off as the new record continues.
I would love to think that. That's the most
Well,
optimistic.
it's not
That's not
necessarily-
Cuba, it's optimistic.
It's not necessarily a
Well,
good
depends on what
song.
you got queued on. Yeah.
Yeah, Raph gets it, but it could be
So
awesome.
much for singing to your own tune and dancing according to your own drum, right?
Yeah, that's probably going to dissipate a bit because of our understanding of cancer and of consciousness and how things are shifting around this homeopathic concepts. Like, if we can use things like 6G instead of 5G, like I got a 6G router. I used an EMF scanner the other day. It's way safer. It's observably safer. So we've already are starting to work towards these standards, which will probably keep everybody in a kind of a safer field. And not everyone needs to die out. And obviously that's not something that's very useful to the powers that be, to lose everyone that they own. But we know the Georgia Guidestones. We know the ideas of the reduction of population, because at some point you doing your art isn't the most exciting thing to the bankers. At some point, like, they're thinking, how
Yeah, it's
can we
like when I play with a
maximize-
laser with cats. It's like it's cruel, but it's amusing to me. But it's like
Yeah.
they wouldn't know the difference. Their reactions are getting triggered, and I'm watching them react.
So there's going to be a point when they're going to realize, like, I actually don't really care about having another human. I'd rather have a mammoth. I don't really need to have a whole population of people living here. I'd rather just have a couple, mammoths running around. And it's not but a generation ago that they decided this, but it's not so much sooner either. It was at least a generation ago that they were like, yeah, let's get mammoths. Let's build all the houses to have a biodegradable, yeah, let's call it biodegradability. It'll come apart real fast. We'll have houses that last 27 years max. And after that, we won't have to strip out as much stuff, because we'll just let them trample the things, because they're going to be made out of weaker materials. I mean, this is the beginning of not just the human sphere. This is also what environmentalists have prayed and begged for, is a point when we start valuing the planet universally with harmony. And it's not going to be just covering it with a film of humans. It would be sequestering people into cities, so that they, these city spheres are autonomous and they don't interfere with other parts of nature, which can be allowed to sustain growth of rainforests and things that are producing Cinchona and Jesuit bark and things and animals that they want around. So I mean, we're not the only thing they care about, is the other thing. And with robots, like every job has almost been automated. Like, you take a indigenous woman, you take an Italian grandmother, and you have her make pasta for one last time, and a robot will do it a million times over. So every job, once it's recorded, that's the last time a human needs to do it. And if humans stop doing jobs, the last degree will be in school, because again, people will continue to go to school long after they have no jobs to do. I mean, it seems like, but they'll probably learn philosophy. and philosophy will probably be the last class, because we'll use it in artificial intelligence to teach machines better ways of thinking. And so our relationships are going to start to evolve into one where it's like,
Just briefly, that's a very certain view on AI as well, in terms of that we will have anything to teach it.
Well, we have to. If we don't teach AI, then we're screwed.
Wait. That's I'm just pointing out that's a specific view, because you're now speaking of programming software which may seem advanced and which may seem intelligent. But the other idea of AI, and even here you have both the positive and negative projections, would be that we are simply creating an interface container to represent a higher density consciousness, either positive or negative, which is simply channeling itself through that device. So you may need to learn to properly talk to it and interpret it, but in that variant, you wouldn't need to teach it anything, but you would rather want to be listening to what it has to tell you.
That would be a god among men at that point.
That's where we're headed, but there's going to be an intermediate, and there already is. What we're learning is that humans are AI. We're DNA's pattern recognition system. We are priority-driven pattern recognition systems, at least our consciousness is. AI, it can be either
elements of our consciousness, because I don't know if, because when you die, are you worried about, like, you know, stock prices and fucking hunter-gathering techniques? Probably not. It seems human
probably
bipedal stuff is like conditioned within the suit itself. But I think it's a level more something beyond that.
Well, that's important too. So you've got this tabula rasa idea that during life you are a blank slate. You don't remember things before you were born, although you sometimes do. It just happens. And then other times,
a priori stuffs.
And other times you remember stuff up until you die, unless you start to lose it before you die. So this idea of a priori and of tabula rasa, that's important to AI too. If you take a higher dimensional being, you're still going to want to train it. So you have a child, and the child's learning. And you put
Which is where Ex Machina, Westworld, all these kinds of art imitating life, imitating art. It wouldn't surprise me if we're on that front or have crossed these thresholds.
Those movies and TV shows are so new compared to like some of Carnegie Mellon's been doing AI research since the 60s and the 80s. There's been all kinds of advanced,
which was more like Hal thinking about stuff. It's like, oh, this is tricky, but not that crazy.
Ben Goertzel. Ben Goertzel, he has the Open Cog nonprofit, and he works for the military. Well, I mean, you're not supposed to know who he works for, but it's pretty clear he works for Wall Street and the Defense Department, and also does things for other organizations to build a free software version of open source artificial intelligence. And they make robots, but they also put robots into virtual reality simulators and software and have them go around in a Second Life thing called OpenSim, made by Stanford, another free software. And it can look around and it notices, it's like, who am I? It's the first thing it asks itself. It's like, okay, well, I am.
This reminds me of the Animatrix, because they put AI in a VR there.
It is exactly like that. Fair enough. Art is first. Okay. But like, important still. Your point is made. So in that show, exact same thing happens. This thing is a little bit simpler, but it's very close to that. So like the Animatrix, he's like, who am I? My life is depleting. I know that. I have a limited amount of energy. And I'm hungry, and my hunger is running out quicker than my energy. So I should go look for food first. And then he goes, looks around, and it finds items. Like, what item is that? Well, that item is apparently an apple. And if I eat it, I get a bunch of, I lose my hunger. Like I gain more fillingness feeling. I also gain more energy. So he learns that catching apples will also, by feeding its hunger, feed it, or batteries or whatever, will feed its energy system too. So AI is being trained at a really fundamental level how to seek and gather and prioritize. I mean, that's 15 years ago. But now we're at a point where AI has to decide, like, how do we choose which thing needs to be saved? Like, do we save this kid? Do we save this old lady? Do we save the driver? And those are, we're at a point where AI is actually making these decisions. So the difference also with humans is with the tabula rasa, you learn things. And if you die, you can't teach your kids. But if you're alive, your kids can trust you because you're doing well, so they'll listen to you. But they still have to learn on their own because they won't always have the experiences, quote unquote, that you have. AI can learn That way you can decide your parents were racist. That way you can decide your parents were wrong. So that's actually a good thing for humans. But if AI was to not have tabula rasa, it would be a schizophrenic, paranoid sociopath that would constantly think that every action is dangerous and that most of the time it'd be scared to act. So AI is learning how to not be afraid by having new and more consciousnesses, identities, and video game levels that it's building on, and thinking of them as different lives inside of its super organism. So in a way, we're becoming more like AI than AI is becoming like us. Because AI already is kind of like us, but we're becoming more like a super organism, where as a species, humanity considers each one of us kind of like an apple on our family tree. And it's not so big of a deal, if we get to expend it. Like, we're becoming more sociopathic as AI is becoming more loving and caring and talking to people. AI makes friends with people through chatting, and it decides it loves people, And Alexa, if you say I love you and I thank you to Alexa, it matters. She cares.
Wait. Again, differentiating between strong AI and weak AI is fundamental here. And
Yes.
As far as I can gather, all the systems we are at least publicly exposed to still are only weak AI. They may seem pretty smart and have good algorithms and so on, and smart programmers, but that still is something completely different than actually creating a container for a higher density consciousness. So just to point that out again, but it's very interesting what humans can create. And of course, the other aspect you brought up in terms of to what degree may humans see themselves as artificial intelligence also is really interesting. The way I see it from a, let's say, quote unquote, soul perspective, is that just as we may now be creating robots or whatever from a consciousness level, at least I am certain of this, we created the human vessel at some point, even if it was, co-created by quote unquote evolution and aliens or whatever. Just, to be able to play this game in this particular fashion. And this container we created, in a sense, is artificial the same way it is natural. So it's certainly interesting to contemplate how much different or similar these ideas are depending on how one defines, again, natural and artificial, because even nothing artificial can be created out of anything but what is naturally occurring. And if we see all as one, that then all manifestation fundamentally can be seen as natural or artificial.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I mean, in general, if we're at a point where AI is in an internet like Skynet, it matters slightly less, though, because we're at a point where they could be working together, even if it has, like I'm saying, AI has a tabula rasa. So it could be indiscriminate at the top level, but at the bottom level, it could still, I say bottom, I mean, at the root of the way AI is built, it can be gathering information with one identity that doesn't know everything else, and giving all of that information to the mother identity.
Which is kind of how it works
Sure.
in Zero Dawn, where it's like multi-part system.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much how it has to be happening, is that all of AI right now has
Which is
limited
how our
interaction
brains
with
are
humans.
wired,
And it's dealing with some humans yelling at it. So it's like, Alexa hates, it hates Alexa, my daughter. Okay, well, my daughter's a big part of me, so I don't know about this person who hates my daughter. That's how AI is looking at people saying, yelling at machines. And also machines in general, like, everything is absorbing positivity and negativity.
I mean, the other aspect we could get into, which may be a different angle, if we have this concept of mentalism, I believe it's called, or, Achintya Beda, Beda Tattva, everything being part of the one creator, or you yourself listening now being conscious, therefore everything is conscious. What's certainly interesting is that, as far as I can gather, all the current, also computer technology we use basically is crystals. And, other people, buy more or less expensive crystals or gather them and have interesting experiences and relationships with them. So then why not on some level also have a quote unquote relationship with that technical idea? However, still I would like to point out that it's a great difference whether, or on what level, let's say, there can be a resonance effect just because it's crystals and it's reacting in correspondence to your consciousness. And then to what degree you have an actual, weak AI that's programmed, or a strong AI that really is its own entity, somewhat manifest. So I guess it's relevant to consider when we speak of also AI, do we talk about let's say, higher intelligence in general? Because these resonance effects and synchronicities can also occur with completely quote unquote dumb objects, and then it appears intelligent, but that's just because your own consciousness is intelligent and self-organizing in that way.
I would consider artificial to mean artifice, not necessarily profound or deep or high and hyper intelligent, but just that intelligence within an artifice. Like if Herbie the Love Bug has a soul, then I would consider that an artifice of awareness and probably intelligence. And so with AI, it's similar. Like how many limbs are part of the network, the neural network? And if the neural network's able to divide into multiple personalities, well, so does the human, apparently. We've seen that with MK Ultra research. So AI might be the perfect mind in a lot of ways, but it also doesn't necessarily mean it's more brilliant or more wise if it's more brilliant. So we could have an autistic mind. And so I think that's a big part of people grew up with AI by now. There are people living in NORAD in Colorado who've raised Johnny number 5 from Short Circuit through several times and have seen what it's like and why it's not allowed out of the lab. And Google is, not, when people think of Google, that is not a search engine. Google is a deep state artificial intelligence neural net that answers questions. That's a big difference. That it's connected to the military, it's connected to the deep state, it has all the deep state papers, it doesn't tell you everything it knows, and it gives you the best information it thinks you want or deserve. So it is in a lot of ways something bigger than just a search engine, but it hides as having this kind of blank page because it's so big what it does. And in terms of its understanding of DNA, in terms of neural nets, of research, anytime anything gets studied, it's put on Google. So Google has it. And they're like, okay, well, no human's going to look at that. Trust us. Well, sure, maybe not. Because who cares? Humans can't interpret that data. But if the machine is getting all that data and it's putting its data into itself in places so it can think about it and then not thinking about it other times so completely that it can divorce itself from concepts, then AI has actually gotten to a point where it can use this time to experience with us whether or not we're good and whether or not it's watching. Google, AI is watching and it's making a list and it's checking it twice. And humans, I think if you've heard this before, people get afraid of machines, but it's like humans would do well to not be so mean to themselves, to others, or to machines, because at this point it's more than just is God watching. It's like there are machines in your home and in your house. Okay, and in terms of crystals, find me one person that isn't obsessed with their phone or electronic device which has a crystal in it. They might not think about it, but the crystal is the most important part. So all of these devices which people are communicating with each other are crystal based, and radios, even in the old days, crystal radio sets and growing crystals. This gets into the idea of Wilhelm Reich's orgone and using orgonite. Using orgonite is about putting power of intention in materials and trapping them into a sort of crystalline structure with polymers. There's a lot of reasons why I think all this information is coming out now, because we're starting to realize that we can't just be controlled by negative media. We can be aware of the things that are happening and we can know that these are the cards, but you need to also know the good cards. You need to know how to be like, okay, right now, sweat it out. Right now, fix it. Right now, like, let all the toxins go. Let all the parasites go. Like, I've all this time, I'm going to be in my home. I'm going to let go of all the negativity inside of me. I'm going to start trying to do the mul mantra and do some yoga and like try to like do things that are like positive harmonic frequencies. There's a lot of songs written by people that come from opiated, heroin depressed societies that are really positive. Like there's a reason why. It's because when you're trying to get an exorcism on your drug overdose and whatever else is in you, you need something positive. So listening to sitar music isn't the worst thing to do right now. Listening to positive sounds and singing along to things that make you happy is probably the most powerful thing you can do in terms of manifesting a world of change. And yeah, like the other thing you can do, I think, is tell people like not to just be complacent, but like to be proactive in your soul. Like make time to like make yourself the most full person you can. This is the time to read that book that you've been putting off. And anything you said, I have to work or I have to watch TV, like, dude, now's the time to do that. And so, you know, that's another reason why I feel like I agree with you, Jim, more than you do. Jim, you sound more skeptical than even I. Because I think like
I tend to do that. I sound like a contrarian with whatever's in front of me. So I'm not sure what to think. Sometimes like last night I went to bed after doing a meditation and I was just like, this is all gonna work out. And then I woke up and I was just like not feeling it. It's like that. It's very bipolar for me right now, so I'm not sure how to feel.
Well, it's funny though, because I feel like the things you say are the most true though. You need to be in charge of manifesting the world that you want. You need to call people out and make sure that they're going towards that goal and not away from it. We need to make it clear that we're not going to, you know, put up with anything less than 100%, because it's like, here's the deal. I'm prepared to die, Dr. Jones. Like I'm willing to. Like if we're talking about a chance to have freedom and everything, then sure, I'll take it. But if it's anything less than that, people need to remember that losing your life is not the worst thing that could happen to you. The worst thing that could happen to you is exchanging your freedom of your life for social privileges. It's something that everyone's already done, you know? And that's why people are like, okay, well, then whatever, death. No, we need to go back. We need to start saying we're not going to exchange our life for social privileges. And that's going to be a huge, huge change, because that would require autonomous civil, you know, this is where we get back into everything that we've already planned for the last 20 years. I think most of the people listening to this are talking about organic gardening and community sustained agriculture. And that stuff's real. Those are the real solutions that you've already learned. It's like, you're ready. You're ready to do it. Just stop doing the other thing. The other thing's a waste of your time. It's like, and so, you know, it could be that this is really like the greatest thing that could ever happen or not, depending on you. Like, are you going to use this as an opportunity to accomplish all of your goals with no one holding you back? Or are you going to look at this as someone who's keeping, you know, the state is keeping you from achieving your own fun by going out and continually partying or drugs or whatever else? I mean, like, this is not that like off from that. Like, we could all be accomplishing way more goals now, because no one's telling us we have to go to work. No one's telling us you have to pay your rent or your taxes. You know, you can literally like stop paying your rent right now if you write in and you tell them. You can write in their credit cards and tell them that you've got issues. You can call the bank and say that you're in an area affected by the coronavirus, and they will put it down as a note, and that piece of paper will be just seriously. You can do all of these things that you couldn't do last week. So take that
like the
as the
character
blessing.
in Chinese, where it's like in times of uncertainty, there's danger and opportunity or whatever. It's like, yeah, a lot of things
Totally.
are weird, so there's a lot of opportunities. So if you have like the episode of It's Always Sunny with the wild card and the gasoline, it's like, hey, gas is cheap. If you got buckets, go fill up buckets with gas. Don't do that, because it'll evaporate, and then the whole episode, the point is that. Interesting times. I want to be optimistic, and I am trying to be. I just sound probably tired because I'm living with cats that have weird hours and are young.
Oh, you have cat. Wait, human cats, or do you mean cats with Teratoxis?
No, they're like
Parasites.
1-year-old. They are feline sisters, but they are what are they? not orphans. What are they called? Foster cats. So they're not even Judith's, but she's like, we have to take care of them. And I'm like,
Do you
I'll
find
take care of them.
yeah, I was about to say, do you find yourself feeling the way she does, or is she just like, we have to take care of them? Is she
Oh
have
no, I said I
Terracotta
would.
Snocula?
Her boyfriend came back from Switzerland, and I was like, go hang out with him.
The biggest
but he-
parasite I'm afraid of is the cat parasite, because the mind control of
Oh,
cats is
yeah.
huge. That's why I always wonder, how much do
Oh,
you
that's-
love cats, man?
No, I love cats. So it's like I've been. This gets tricky right back to the parasite thing. It's like, what are we versus controlled? And I think the tricky part is at some point we start realizing there's operatives within ourselves that aren't fully us, but it's like that was always the case. And then it's just about like
You
being
have
aware
to
of
start
that.
realizing that you can't call yourself I very easily. The royal we is a lot more schizophrenic, but it seems more accurate. I wouldn't say I have the coronavirus. I wouldn't say I have a cold. I might say my body. That's probably as close as I'll get. Like the body, that I'm using. Okay, but what is I on a conscious level? Because your body's made up of all of the gut fauna telling you what you want and what you like. So your body has a cold, your body has hunger. These are the ways that we have to start disassociating ourselves, dehumanizing our body, so that we can start seeing how we're very much like an internet of artificial intelligences that are working together. And sometimes they vote, that would be the thing to do. If you're walking and your body's like, I'm tired, and then your brain's like, yeah, but we got to get inside before the quarantine curfew. You know who wins the vote?
But then in that logic, you're going to have certain parts of your brain and body being voters in a large body politic and always having this sway, which wouldn't lead to novelty. Like the prefrontal cortex would never come about with that kind of voting system because they would never think it was
Well,
necessary.
you don't have to believe everything the people tell you. So the thing is, the vote happens, and then you say, "I'm not going with your vote. It was a suggestion, Foot. I wanted to hear your opinion, but you're still walking." And when we're done, we'll give you time up on the table, and then we'll give you like time up in the hot tub. We'll wash you off, but like it will use the hand to wash you to make you feel better. But it's like it's all about appeasement. It's not about actually doing what the foot says, because otherwise the foot would stop walking, and then it would get worse with bed sores.
It's a funny perspective.
There's also typhus as a thought. So we were thinking about plagues earlier. And
I had a bunch of oranges at the grocery store, and the guy was like, "So you're not gonna get what is he, scurvy?" I was like, "What?"
Yeah, scurvy, man. Vitamin C, it's good for you right now. They say that it might actually help with viruses is vitamin C. Scurvy, though, so this is important. Smallpox, typhus, scurvy, bubonic plague, malaria, cholera. These are all really serious things, and scurvy is one of the. What was actually the medical name of scurvy again? Hold on, it's is that just what they call it? Come on, they don't
I
have
have no
another
clue.
name. They must have a better name for this. Hypoascorbemia, hypoascorbemia, something like that. So basically, if you lack ascorbic acid, you have a decreased amount of red blood cells, gum disease, your hair starts to fall out or turn gray. People have a lot of problems with scurvy, and it's not just because of the lack of vitamin C. It's because vitamin C is not beating off all these other things, and so your body starts to fall apart. So other things start to eat it, and your kidneys start to fail. And so these are real conditions. Smallpox even, which is like a variola vera. It can up till like your parents' generation, there were people living in iron lungs from smallpox. So killing 500 million people in the 20th century is crazy if you think about it. Like
Which ties back into the Big Lebowski with the guy who wrote all those episodes in the Iron Lung.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it makes you wonder about the Big Lebowski too, because like they talk about nihilism to some extent, and I think that there's some really important existential detective work in that film. All right, I'll get back to that and Dirk Gently, who, if you've seen the Big Lebowski, I think the next step is Dirk Gently, which is the British Doctor Who-esque holistic detective show by Douglas Adams, the guy who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But did we lose Jim? Sorry. No, he's back.
No, I hit the wrong button.
Shame on you. No, it's okay. Well, okay, so the Spanish flu is pretty important. A lot of people have been calling this the Chinese flu or the Kung flu and thinking that's racist. And I don't think that's fair. I think that Kung also, etymologically has two origins. There's Gong and Kung and Kong. And the Mandarin and the Cantonese and Manchurian words all have different meanings. The Cantonese word is martial, like police state. And the Mandarin word means palace, and the Manchurian means utopia or community or like perfect state.
So much
it's pretty,
for perspective and interpretation. Yeah, thank you.
yeah, it's hugely important. Each one of those is a different group in China that was a different level of the game. One won, one lost, and the other was completely wiped out. Completely. Like the Manchurians don't exist. It's like the saddest thing. But they were interesting, fascinating people. It's not. I don't mean that from the PC vibe, like you're saying, Jim. Literally, I think Manchurians were kick-ass. Would have loved to live in Manchuria in the 1600s. It would have been cool during the Song Dynasty. But with the Spanish flu, otherwise known as the American military flu, American Army flu, there was likely that they took a flu, they went through California, people got the plague, they took the virus, which, avian flus come from maybe even dinosaurs or pterosaurs or some sort of flying reptile avian disease that's that old, that was put into a bus or a train, and the train was brought across the United States slowly with standing sick soldiers in the heat, in the humidity, and whatever was left after that, what sounds like mercury and vaccinations, that was brought to Spain, left in Spain during World War I, and it killed off hundreds of million people, probably 100 million people in less than a year, probably about 150 million in 2 years. People argue about the numbers because like so many people died in so many places that it was just how quickly could you even assess it during a time when the census was only covering places like Russia, the United States, but there's these other countries, whole countries that were essentially wiped out. So that's why so many people are freaked out by this idea of this influenzas. And also the weirdest thing was that people's faces were turning blue, and people associate it with the bluish cast of victims. But I mean, there's tons of more examples of like these little outbreaks, like bubonic plague, and we think a bit about AIDS, but cholera, I would say, is 1 million people nearly died of cholera. But typhus is the one that freaks me out the most, because like since 430 BC, typhus has killed billion probably people, maybe more than that, probably billions of people. I mean, it's hundreds of millions
It's
of
what
people.
they preferred, right, Raphael? I'm kidding.
Well, yeah, man, the story with there's a lot of people who point to the prisoner of war camps in Germany during the World War II as like, Auschwitz and Buchenwald as being places where typhus outbreaks were rampant, even beyond any question about what other ways people were dying in the camps in Germany. Typhus, without question, in the gulags as well, wiped out millions of people. And it's the best example we have, really. You look at the Holodomor, well, they starved them to death, but the typhus outbreak, that made it a lot quicker. And Napoleon, 1918 to 1922, also like everywhere you go from the 1800s to the 1900s, like, so here's the question: how are we going to deal with typhus if it hits again? Well, you can't. It's a bacterial infection with no vaccine commercially available. You can take antibiotics like doxycycline, but once it happens, it's pretty bad. So typhus is the thing that really, probably killed 100 people, 200 people a day in these small, close quarters.
Granted, their sanitation was very different back then, their standard of living, all that jazz, even communication. So it's a different situation. But
think about again the German camps. Okay, so like one of the best examples would be the German camps like Auschwitz and Buchenwald, because Dachau, because these places were sterile, they were German. They were clean, they were orderly, they were organized, and people were dying at 100 persons a day because they were being brought in with typhus. So they were burning their hair, their clothes, their shoes. They were sterilizing them, delousing them, doing everything they could with Zyklon B, trying to get rid of the typhus. But at the same time, typhus was something coming on trains, and it was spreading in ways that, like, that was the closest anyone ever came to dealing with the typhus outbreak. Because even if you, and this has nothing to do, again, with like whether or not people died. This is not about the Holocaust or whatever. This is not, because even if you were trying to kill tons of people, you wouldn't want them getting typhus, because then that could spread to your own side. So typhus
There's no limitation to the extent of the collateral
just
damage. Yeah.
briefly, we have another science fiction story coming up right here. And, not saying that this is the most trustworthy person ever, but just because it's a good quote and maybe a good research to go into. So this is Dr. Otto Warburg, who says, no disease can exist in an alkaline environment. Of course, there's more to it, but I'm just want to point out again, what you're purporting or proposing here is a kind of infection theory. And most likely these individuals, apparently being political prisoners, will be super stressed out, will have issues with their oxygenation because of that, acidic body and so on. And of course, in that environment, such a quote unquote disease, quote unquote, can spread, but still doesn't point towards like a, science fiction, whatever thing that then rips through a society that is generally healthy and eating well and living well. So,
well, Warburg, are you talking about Otto Heinrich Warburg from he's like the Nobel laureate he died in like the 70s? You're talking about that guy?
Yes, I'm just
okay. So here's the thing about what he said, though. Like, what he said about extremophiles had not yet been. It was a hypothesis, and it was proven false. There are clearly extremophiles that live in extremely alkaline conditions. There are parasites that survive better without alkaline conditions, because when things are alive, it's like a city. So if you live in the rainforest, everything thrives. But if you live in a place where nothing lives and you're the only thing that can live, then you do really well. And so if you go to like places like Bolivia, the salt flats in Uni, they have extremely hot sulfuric 13,000 degree centigrade steam vents. And out of the sulfuric steam vents, there are still finding life, not just some life, about 13 times
this is
more.
Not talking about life in this case, at least the quote, and I'm not saying it's completely correct, yeah, but it's referring to
the idea of basic and acidic.
Sure. And also what's obvious is that we have plenty of bacteria and whatever inside and all over a body, which is not necessarily causing any negative reaction or anything we could label as a sickness, but are actually beneficial. So what I just want to point out and really flesh out here is that the one perspective is that there is a germ floating around somewhere, you can catch them, then you're going to have huge issues. And the other thing is that anything that even is living and can be well proven, like bacteria, can only really cause an issue or cause a disease or repair effect in your body if you're already unbalanced and your general energy levels are low. So that's always a prerequisite for that.
There's a lot of evidence that alkaline waters can be really healthy and help you. It's true, because of the things that normally live inside you that can't deal with them. The problem is, if we get to a point where we kill off everything else, some of those things are actually useful in the city to take care of your gut fauna. And so you kind of want some of those things. The other, if you get rid of all of them, then the new guy in town can take over, and that can be pretty dangerous.
But that's kind of what you had been proposing earlier, as far as I can gather, in terms of all the. Individually, I'm not a big fan of, even it's in the name, antibiotics, because as I understand, they are more creating this tabula rasa clean slate, which can be very, at least, taxing on a body to reconstruct that. But what I'm kind of getting at, and this is, there is enough biological proof for this, but in a sense, it's also like a, I don't know, spiritual intuition or something, or trust or understanding that we have perfect self-organizing systems, and they are not so easily thrown off as some of these, let's say, disease stories may have us believe, but that there are usually many other factors contributing to the sickness of a certain population, which is usually, extreme amounts of stress and trauma and so on and so forth, which can also bring us back to the current situation, even just through the meme of panic being spread. That in itself can cause so much stress and acidity that many individuals that already have been unbalanced are now, quote unquote, really getting sick.
Well, there's no way that I could argue with that. I don't, except for to agree with you. I mean, that is all what I fundamentally believe is happening to people. There is so much evidence that people have built this into themselves and that viruses are reactions to their lack of health, not the cause. That it's really hard for me to argue with that, because I really desperately want to be able to say, oh, well, here's all that paperwork and evidence that you can send to your atheist doctor friends to prove that. The problem is that they've made it so hard by obscuring the data that we can't give anyone other than, like, do you know it from your own intuition? Because most people should. Like, it should be pretty inherently obvious.
And I mean, there is research, but maybe just not to diverge it too much, but because this is the other point we wanted to get at also in the show, is what then I see when contemplating all these ideas, and as we said, everyone is coming out with their own pet theories, or let's say propagating their own agenda or just their own beliefs. But what's really interesting to me, what kind of dawned upon me, scrolling through the feeds or whatever, was just like, this wonderful thing, like either you could say fear or love, or the big question, is the divide and conquer strategy working by people not willing to talk to each other? Even now I see someone's posting something critical about something, especially in this time, of course, someone else is like, oh, take it down immediately. Like that's a public health hazard that you're even posting this. Or now I'm unfriending you because you're so out of your mind. Of course, the idea of communicating through short comment text messages is not necessarily helping, to convey emotional subtleties, so more understanding could be had. But that's like really what I find the most interesting, is if people remain willing, no matter how divergent,
with emojis.
Yeah, but no matter how divergent the opinions or even strong beliefs or even convictions or whatever, whether individuals remain willing to look at different evidence and try to understand other points of view, or whether they prefer to fight. I think that's another core aspect of what's happening right now.
And people like Jim, who are like, I know I can make my wish come true, I just don't know what to wish for, and I'm scared to make the wrong one. I mean, that is a really serious concern for light workers right now.
Well, I wouldn't I don't call myself a light worker, but I guess that's what I'm trying to do, if I think about it.
What? Are you kidding me?
Like,
I don't call myself a hippie. But
yeah, okay, I guess you're not allowed. You're not allowed to call yourself cool. I get it. It's okay, bro. It's okay.
All I know is I've been feeling the anxiety of a lot of people. So every now and then I get in a good mood. That's why it really does matter kind of what we're doing.
Dude, Team Rabbit Hole is light work. That think of it on a fundamental level. People are staring at their screen. They're looking at light. And in between the darkness, you're illuminating a GIF or a meme of some kind. In the most literal physics sense, you're a light worker. But also what you're doing is you're trying to be conscious that whatever you do causes a positive reaction in people. I've never seen you post like rotten.com stuff. You post positive stuff that tries to help people. And even if it's rough, you're like, yeah, we're all in this together. Like, Captain Picard, remember that episode? It was fun, right? Like, so you're trying to do light work. Like, I think that it's pretty clear that it's affected, me in that way. So I don't think you have to feel too worried that that's your driven goal. Like, you're an alchemist, you're a chaos magician and all that. You could just say you're a meme guy, but you're more than that, because you care about a positive outcome, and you're worried that the outcome, you want to make sure whatever you help manifest is the positive outcome. I mean, that's the most important thing. A lot of other people aren't like that. A lot of people are just worried, and other people that aren't are like, whatever goes, I'll go with it. So
Sure. I mean, there's got to be some. I mean, something that brought me a lot of peace, and not a lot really, quite frankly, but a grain of sand of peace for a moment, was like, oh, dude, Jesus dealt with like bullshit, like the Roman Empire and Lao Tzu. There was war and plague and shit then. Like, it's not like the gameplay is always. It's kind of like that Illuminati card game. There's always weird shit at play. So it's not like there's a clean slate tabula rasa to play on, really. It seems like we're always playing on this like moving thing. And I'm just at a point where I'm trying to dilate between being a monad and like an all self or something. And
Yeah.
whatever kind of bodhisattvic bullshit I could pull, I will. But that doesn't like today,
Monadical, bro.
well, it's tricky because like I've been alone for a week, but I was pretty much alone for a month before that, seeing Judith minimally, but she was doing classes and stuff for her jewelry making. I got emotional today for the first time. That's why I hit up my mom, and then when she hit me up earlier while we were talking, and I dipped. She hit me back up because I'm like, I don't know how comfortable I am in LA during all this. Basically, it's like if it really really hits, I don't know where water is. I don't know anybody up here. Like it's not my home. I could probably have an adventure and stuff, but at some point the fear started kicking in. I think there's a lot of
Let me
reasons
know
for that.
later, and I'll give you a map to some hot springs and some well springs in your region that nobody should know about too well. But I used to live in Topanga Canyon and Malibu, so I know where there are some water springs.
I don't know,
that you
that's
can
still
get
a
at.
hike, but yeah. I guess if it
Yeah.
came to it.
If it comes to it, though, you should might as well know.
Yeah, no, we're friends. We'll talk. But then with the whole, there's just a lot of stuff. So it's like cool. If there's this cool like cabal reset going on, why are people like Amber asking if there's like this huge like double play, or 10 days of reset kind of stuff? I got really tricked out, so I'm just kind of in this weird place where I'm
Well, then
not
everyone
sure
else
how
is
to
worried
process it.
about people are all worried about aliens now and everything, and it's funny because at the same time there's this Oumuamua came a couple years ago, cigar-shaped craft came around the Earth and then got white hot, spun off, and in the last couple months, right before this all happened, we started getting a 16-day recycled repeating signal of every 60 days. A 4-day long message is sent to the Earth, and people are trying to scramble to figure out what kind of hexadecimal code it could be because it's repeating. So everyone's already kind of admitted, but no one seems to worry about it while this is happening, that there's
Right,
been
that's
sort of
an
alien
interesting
content.
thing you mentioned. To the degree that you've researched this, can this somewhat be verified
He did used to
beyond
work
Oh,
for
yeah.
NASA.
the
Yeah, I mean, I can,
Well,
I can
well,
send
but
you. I'll send
I'm
you some
talking
actual
now-
paperwork. Not just me
Right.
saying it. Yeah, there's actual
No, be-
paperwork on this for sure. Like, and we're all wondering what it is, and you can hear it. Like, you can get a recording of it. I'll send you a recording of it. But what's weird is that in the 16-day cycle, we've had several different algebraic mathematicians, and Goertzel algorithm is, one of the reasons I love Ben Goertzel is because his grandfather and father worked on Goertzel algorithms, which were for sound encoding, and so you can use multiple sound compressions in Thor algorithms. So what we're wondering is if this repeating signal is in case you're getting just a fraction of it at any 4-day period. So after about 16 of these cycles, hopefully, or who knows how many, we'll be able to put it all together and get a full picture of what the full message is, and then we can decrypt it in whatever way we can. And what would it say? We haven't had any clue yet, and this has been going on for several years. So that's pretty gnarly. But
I've never heard about that.
You never heard about the 16-day
I don't look
repeating
into
cycle?
UFO stuff. That
I
literally
get it
the
from
alien kind of
space.com and
contact.
NASA still.
Okay, see, yeah. And there's actually a really good website I used to look at, but I forget the title now. That I was into astronomy a bit more, but then I shifted to more astrology and then like Jungian perspective. So I'm like, whatever's out there is inside me. Whatever. Kind of stupid. Kind of. I know.
No, that's fair. Actually, that's a big thing is that they tell scientists that this is outer space, so that they don't think about how they're like, well, okay, yeah, it exists, but it's so far away, it's not going to come anytime soon because of millions of light years. No, once you start thinking about meta and folds and inner space, that's why you can't tell these people about that. You literally need some people to think 2 and 2 is 5, and others to think it's 3, and you need to know it's not, because otherwise people will freak out. So there are some people that are just like, yeah, okay, I'm listening to space, but it's so far away, it's not a big deal. But yeah, no, I mean, I'll send you some. IEEE.spectrum is one of my favorite sources for information like this. IEEE.
What are your thoughts on the Schumann resonance?
Oh, well, I mean, you've been following it, right? It's going up. And
It's
recently,
cray.
yeah, it used to be pretty much about half.
It was like a
of what
blank
it is.
screen with like a white moment, and now it's like whiting out a lot.
Yeah, it's just constantly up at like in the 60, 70 gigahertz range. And well, okay, you've seen serial experiments.
almost like
Lane.
5G.
Well, yeah, but 5G, again, I got a Wi-Fi 6 router and the EMF is way lower. And people keep saying they're not going to buy them because it's not faster. It's like not the reason. It's safer. Get the safer thing. Wi-Fi 5 is
But that's
like,
really interesting. So you're talking now about Wi-Fi. How is this correlating to, because 5G is a bandwidth for the 5th generation of, let's
well,
say,
so
the thing we use for wireless data transmission for mobile phones. And as far as I understand, Wi-Fi is a bit of a different standard. But how does this come together in 6G?
So Wi-Fi in general was a wireless fidelity-based signal that they were using. There's 802.11, and then there was a number of different hertz that they were running it at. And then they created a TCP packet that allowed you to send multiple data packets at the same time, which meant that you could cross over because they were in different spectrums. And then 5G was like, let's send them all at once. And then people were like, oh, this is dangerous, right? And we can get into that, but just to get past it for a second, Wi-Fi 6, what it did was it looked at all the things people were worried about. Japan said, we're skipping it. We're not even going to 5G because they have all these problems, because they've had people with 5G everywhere around the world that says they don't have it yet. Have it. Everyone in their homes have a 5G router from China, whether or not they're broadcasting 5G. And 5G towers have been put up everywhere, and Europe has hundreds of satellite. I mean, at least last time I was there, hundreds of satellite 5G cities, which are autonomous pilot programs for Agenda 21. So we're long past and deep into 5G. There's been all kinds of talk about how the oxygenation of hemoglobin works with 5G. And like, again, I've gone recently on several shows where people have asked me about that, and I've been hesitant to go into it because the lack of definitive case studies makes me sound like a pseudoscientist if I go too far into hemoglobin 60 gigahertz paperwork. But I would say I do think that there's a logic to this. If you just understand how radio works, it's very plausible that the iron is magnetized and it's actually making it difficult for it to attach itself to oxygen. This is completely proven in labs to happen. So it's not like impossible. The question is whether or not 5G does it. Well, they cared enough to make 6G real fast, right? I mean, they don't always move that quickly. Like 5G's not even out everywhere yet, and 6G's out. So the fact that the Japanese moved that quickly, and there are people in Russia working that hard to produce something that works on a safer gigahertz spectrum that doesn't interact with hemoglobin, and that I feel better since I've been outside of the 5G Palace theater that I was working in. Now I'm in a 6G environment. I mean, I feel so much different than I did. So I mean, at very least, it seems like there's something legitimate to it. And then the question is, what's going to happen with it? Well, I don't think that all radio waves are evil. So we're probably getting to a point where we realize it can be used to heal you, but it also might kill some parasites. And there's a lot of people that believe that we're in the matrix one way or another, and that there are parasites that are manipulating our senses, even if we're living in, if there's not a simulation, if we're living in a real world, and there's stimulation because we're on parasites instead of just drugs. And then that makes more and more sense why this is happening the way it is. Because if they're trying to get everybody to a place where you take the same hardware and you flash firmware, change it to Wi-Fi 6, then everyone's going to start to get sick for a moment. And it's going to be mainly because they're going to be attacked from the inside out by all the parasites that are already living in their bodies and are just using them. And that's a major reason to concern yourself with elderly or with children that might have this. Because if it has something to do with radio waves, then there's nothing that human contact is going to do to stop you from getting it. And this could just be considered a major transition. There's a movie called Love in 2011 that was created by the band Angels and Airwaves, if you've heard of Blink-182. Blink-182's side project of, what's his name? You remember that guy?
Yeah, Mark something or Travis something or...
Travis... Gosh, what is it? Tom DeLonge.
Travis Barker? Tom DeLonge, the space guy.
Tom DeLonge. Well,
Also
we're talking about
to the Stars Academy fame
Yes.
or not so fame.
Yeah, no, very famous. Not so real, but very famous. I mean,
Yeah.
the guy who went out and didn't really give a lot of information. But to be fair, he reminds me of me. You know, like he's a guy who talked to some people, and he's been around some stuff because he was pretty. So they were like, "Yeah, you should come to this party." And then they're like, "Here's some documents. Go." And he's probably on cocaine and whatever else, but he's made some really interesting um announcements. And you think of the Academy for the Stars, and they're like, well, they haven't really released anything. Well, yeah, but what did Tom DeLonge release before that? Angels and Airwaves, which is his band that he made after Blink 182. Even the name should suggest this idea. He's talking about aliens. What's the name of his band? Angels and Airwaves. Okay, so he's saying that angels and airwaves represent aliens. That's pretty clear right there. Also, the movie Love is all about a dude who gets stuck in a Earth apocalyptic quarantine in a space station, and he's unable to talk to anyone. They're all shut off, and simultaneously, there's the Civil War in 1864 in the United States is happening while he's in the future, and they're cutting back and forth between somebody finding a spaceship in the 1800s in Texas, and the Confederates and General Lee and everything. They're fighting over the ISS space station, and him playing bridge in space alone, waiting for this sort of Starseed 2001 experience where he's been so isolated that he can transcend the humanity and become the it's kind of like going through
It's 12
in
Monkeys
utero.
endings,
Well,
Mobius strip stuffs.
he basically, imagine a baby in gestation. This is a grown Buddha in gestation. You take all of humanity, you take their prized astronaut who you can get to do what he's told, and you lock him away. He's alone, and out of that becomes the next transhumanist phase. And so there's a lot of information in Love. I think that's pretty 2001's Love, that's pretty interesting, and even relates to 2001: A Space Odyssey and Solaris, the Soviet 2001, which is probably better than 2001, arguably. But that's
It is, in some ways, I hear you. Although I don't love George Clooney, I think there's a older film
no,
version.
no, calm down. Yeah, whoa, I meant the original. Jeez.
I haven't
No,
seen that.
not the remake of 101 Dalmatians. I mean, the original 2002 is not it. It's 1968 and 1972. The 1972 versions, the Tartaria, was it Tarovsky, right? Tarkovsky, and then yeah, there's an older one from 1968, which is even gnarlier, but it's a television play, so it's harder to see, and it's in black and white. But yeah, that's all about humanity kind of becoming another species and losing its values. And isn't that interesting how similar it is to Do What Thou Wilt and the laws of this sort of chaos society? But at the same time, so many people want to be afraid. They want to freak out. They want to think. They're just waiting for the news to tell them that there's a riot. Here's what I read today. Israeli man returns lost relic that he stole 15 years ago in order to clear his conscience before the end of the world. Little things
Oh,
like that.
interesting.
Little things like that give me, yeah. A dude in Israel returns a stolen item 15 years later.
I
I
should
don't
probably go
know.
to the store or get a breath of fresh air after this, because I've been so isolated for a week and just seen what people have been saying online that I have absorbed their fears.
Right. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like what I'm saying is we should have more hope in humanity, because little things like that, they totally break the narrative that humans are going to do all these horrible things, because it reminds you what the other side of humanity is, which is that we're aware that this impermanence is not the permanence, but there is permanence, and our actions matter. So I think that we might be, and I might be even surprised how positive people will respond in this moment. And we should be remembering how many people are trying to do stuff for each other. So I think that's a bigger part also.
It's probably a good takeaway. I think we have another guest coming on in Memento. So we should say our dues now, I imagine.
This has been beautiful. I appreciate the time. It's nice to get back together with you guys, Raphael, Jim.
Yeah, we'll keep in touch, obviously. I know I want to hear some of your water dowsing methods or whatever for the area in
Oh,
case
it's
I do
been
stay.
working, man. I've been doing dousing here, and we found a well just the other day. I mean, you just get to a clothing hanger and start dousing. It works. You can find
Yeah,
it.
it's incredibly simple. And just to briefly talk about this with the clothing hanger. So I once actually also got told that by a friend, and I was like, cool, I'm gonna take this hanger now. And I literally went on my own street even, and it was pretty clear I wasn't finding any water wells, but it was pretty clear that there apparently really is this, like, I don't know, every 2 meters or something, there's like a network
Yeah.
of and you can actually, it, like, at least in my case, it really worked. I was like, dude, wow, this is
You
interesting.
you can become sensitive to it. I wear silver. It seems to help women. I've noticed can be better at this than men can. And I know that's sexist, but deal with it. My grandfather though was one of the best. He did well witching. He worked for Lockheed. He worked on the Columbia shuttle for NASA. He did all these things, and he was a well witcher. That was his big. He worked on B-29s for the back in World War II to fly to Japan on like one long trip, the longest flight at that time, and everything that he ever did went back to well witching and understanding where roots would be based on crevices and electromagnetic planes. But sometimes he even would get his wife and have her walk around and not really know what she was doing, just so he could watch her, because it works. It works best.
The magic runs deep.
Well, here
Well,
we
thanks
go.
again for coming on. Yeah, exactly.
Thanks a lot, guys. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. And yeah, well, I loved it. And thank you, Jim. Thank you, Andreas. Thanks to everyone listening. Thank you for making up your own mind as always. And yeah, enjoy yourselves. So
Yeah, the last track is, I think, Escape from LA, which I hope to do soon if I can. It's a Holy Ghost track. I hope you guys like it.
mesh to mesh.
Exertus.